That Shifter Love by Mary T. Williams. A werewolf shifter romance story via romancely.com.
Chapter 1. Lucy stared in the mirror. Her reflection stared back. She made a couple of faces at herself, then giggled at her silliness. She stretched her arms above her head and admired her brown skin, darker than most women of color, but perfectly flawless. She turned sideways, her bounteous body moving fluidly. She lifted her big breasts and ran her hands over her ample thighs, smiling. Lucy had always been extraordinarily proud of her looks, even though she certainly didn't fit the human ideas of traditional beauty. So she didn't pay attention to their ridiculous ideas, dressing as she pleased in what she felt she looked good in. And she looked good. She finished her inspection of her body and glanced into her bedroom to make sure the blinds were down. They were, so she shifted into her werewolf form to inspect that version of herself as well. Gorgeous, she thought, as a human and as a werewolf. She pranced around her room in her werewolf form, enjoying the freedom of the animal form. She actually hated clothes, had rarely wore them when she'd lived in the mountains with her pack. But she loved being in the city. So much life, so many interesting people and things and places. So she had to wear clothes every day, big deal. The city offered her so much more than the mountains had. She'd had to leave. Lucy shook herself out of her reverie before some of the bad memories surfaced and ruined her perfectly well-begun day and shifted back into human form. She stretched again, arms high and up on her toes, then dug through her closet for one of her work shirts. Her phone rang as she was shrugging it on over her bra and looking around for her shorts to complete her work uniform. Hello. Hey Lucy, it's Marla. Hey Marla. What's going on? Not much, but I have a huge favor, Marla said. Lucy and Marla had met through their online courses. Once a month, the online class met in the classroom with the professor, some by Skype, others in person, and Lucy and Marla had become fast friends and often helped each other with classwork. What kind of favor? Lucy asked, skeptical. The last favor Marla had asked for had included finishing a project for her, and Lucy just didn't have the time to do both her own and most of Marla's. I have to miss the meeting this month. Can you take notes for me? She asked. I've already told the professor, and she said it would be okay, just to get the notes from someone. Lucy breathed a sigh of relief. I can do that, sure. I'll make a copy of mine to give to you. You can buy me lunch the next day. Deal, Marla said, a smile on her face. You know, I chose journalism because I'm a good writer, but I feel like I don't know anything at all. Same here, girl, Lucy agreed, sliding into her shorts as she spoke. But supposedly it'll all pay off in the long run. Yeah, we'll see, Marla grumbled. Hey, I've got to run. I have to get to work. Lucy was tying her shoelaces. The boss got pissy the last time I walked in at exactly the start of my shift. He prefers us to be a couple minutes early. Bosses, blah. They're all assholes. Marla laughed. Yes, ma'am. Lucy chuckled as she ended the call, threw her phone in her bag, and headed out the door. She grabbed her keys off the hook as she left and locked the door behind her. She grumbled when she stepped out onto the stoop. Rain was seeping out of the sky, creating small puddles everywhere. Just enough rain to cause a mess, she thought. She turned around to get her umbrella and an extra pair of shoes, contemplating a cab, but the expense wasn't worth it. Café Blue was more of a fancy bar than an actual cafe. They served cute little sandwiches, soups, and salads with wine at lunch, but after 6 it was fried foods and beer. 2 blocks from her apartment, it was convenient and a relatively safe walk for Lucy, and the boss had agreed to work around her school schedule when necessary. Lucy preferred the afternoon shift through the evening because the tips were better, and that was usually the shift her boss gave her. Today, though, she was working lunch until 8. The best tips were after 9, but any tips were better than no tips. Lucy walked in the back door 3 minutes before her shift started, shaking out her umbrella and leaning it against the door jamb along with a handful of others. She clocked in and smiled at the cook, Sammy, who was dishing up something that might have been gumbo, but she wasn't sure. It smelled great, though, and Lucy knew what she'd be having for her break snack later. She plopped down on the bench next to the cubbyholes for their things and changed shoes, mumbling about wet socks as she did so. Do I smell a wet dog? Her best friend, Kayla, stepped in, winking at her as she made her rude joke. Only if you're smelling yourself, you nasty bitch, Lucy joked back, and they laughed. Enjoy the wet walk over? Of course I did. I love wet shoes and clothes at the beginning of my shift, Kayla replied sarcastically. Keeps me from complacency. Where did you learn that word? Word of the day calendar. Lucy teased as she rose and reached for her apron, notepad, and pencil. Kayla threw a pencil at her, which Lucy caught it deftly and slipped into her apron pocket. Thanks, doll. I can always use a spare. Ugh. I forget your damn wolfy powers give you quick reflexes. Now give me my pencil back, Kayla growled. Lucy handed it to her and admonished. Keep your voice down. Sammy is right there. He's not listening, Kayla claimed after glancing in his direction. Besides, he thinks I'm completely nuts anyway. He'll think I'm just being weird. Lucy snorted. You are weird. And you love me for it. Lucy rolled her shoulders and put on her best fake smile. Let's go wait on some customers. I need some good tips. Mama wants to go shopping this weekend. 3 hours later, the lunch rush had ended. Between 3 and 5, the cafe's business was slow. So Lucy and Kayla used the time to do the little things that have to be done to keep customers happy, such as filling salt and pepper shakers, replacing ketchup bottles, and rolling the silverware in napkins. They chatted amiably as they completed these mindless tasks, talking about Lucy's school and Kayla's auditions or acting jobs, whichever she was working on at the time. And sometimes they talked about men, although that was usually a short conversation. So, any prospects? Kayla asked as she rattled the clean silverware in a tub to find another butter knife to add to the fork she was rolling. Since yesterday? No, Lucy responded. I don't go anywhere to meet anyone. I thought you were going to fix me up. Oh sure, because I meet all kinds of straight men in dance class. Kayla rolled her eyes. They can't all be gay, Lucy replied. They aren't, but they're too pretty for either of us. Lucy raised her eyebrow in a what does that mean look. You know what I mean. They care way more about their own looks than we do. Ego, ego, ego. Lucy chuckled at her friend's defense, but she knew it was true. Lucy had joined Kayla at one of her cast parties after a show had wrapped, and she'd been completely turned off by the men there. They had preened about like peacocks looking for a mate, and she'd been ready to leave about 10 minutes after she'd arrived. The door opened, letting in a quick blast of fresh spring air before closing. Lucy looked around and recognized the lecherous fart who liked to harass her and the other waitresses. They'd complained to the boss, but since the man had never touched one of them, the boss claimed they'd be fine. He was a good tipper, after all, even when the girls were borderline rude to him. She rolled her eyes and looked at Kayla, whose shoulders had dropped at the sight of him. Lucy whispered, It's your turn. Kayla's eyes widened. No way. I had to deal with him last time. Actually, we made Tiffany deal with him last time, so it's your turn. Rock, paper, scissors? Kayla held out her fist, and Lucy put hers out too. 3 bumps later, and Lucy was headed over to take his order. Hi there, she said to him in an unenthusiastic manner. How can I help you today? You can start by walking away so I can check out that fine ghetto booty you're rocking, he said, wiggling his eyebrows at her. Lucy stared at him blandly, pencil poised over her notepad. He cleared his throat and ordered with a grin on his face. A pint of Guinness and some of that gumbo I've been hearing about. Lucy turned without replying and walked to the kitchen. She could feel his eyes following her as she walked away, and she mentally shivered. Hey, hot stuff, bring me a glass of water too, the guy called to her. She responded with a lifted hand but did not turn around or speak. What she wouldn't give to shift in front of him and scare the shit out of him. But no, that wasn't allowed here. Humans in the city preferred to believe that wers kept themselves in the country rather than in the city. Many actually still seemed to believe wers were myths, although proof was available on YouTube, on the news, and in the newspapers. She put in the guy's order and returned with a glass of water. The guy's name was Austin, but none of the girls called him by his name. He was pervert. Here you go. Thanks, sexy, Austin said and winked lasciviously at her. She rolled his eyes at him, which only made his grin widened. His favorite thing was getting a response out of the girls. How long for that Guinness? I'm going to check right now, Lucy replied in a monotone. She was hoping to return with both his drink and his gumbo so she would only have to come back once more. So she took her time wandering back to the kitchen. Luckily, the gumbo had been ladled and was waiting for her in a steaming bowl. She smiled her thanks at Sammy, who waved at her, grabbed the bowl and the beer and headed back. Here's your food and your drink, Lucy said. She set his order down and stood up straight. Anything else you need? Just your phone number, Austin replied with a wink. And a date. Lucy knew better than to answer, but she did. You won't get either of those things from me. Too bad, he replied around a mouthful of the spicy gumbo. The tip I can give you is quite large. Lucy stared at him, debating whether he was making a crude remark. The look on his face told her he was. She grimaced at him and walked away without speaking. She could hear him chuckling as she walked away. When she told Kayla what he'd said, she was furious. Okay, that's enough. I think it's time Jeff had a talk with that guy, Kayla fumed. I'm going back there to tell him now. He's not here today, remember? Lucy reminded her as she added salt to a shaker. He won't be back until tomorrow. Sammy is in charge. Growling. That guy burns my ass. Yeah, he's a scumbag. Let's just ignore him. Maybe serve him a beer we've drooled in. Lucy giggled. Austin remained in his booth for the rest of Lucy's shift, steadily plowing through 3 more pints and slurring cruder innuendos as afternoon shifted to evening. Kayla's shift had ended at 5 o'clock, and she'd been replaced by 2 waitresses, both of whom refused to serve Austin. Around 5:30, the dinner crowd wandered in, so Lucy's attention was more divided, which seemed to irritate Austin. He called her over more frequently with requests for more ketchup, even though he'd ordered nothing but another bowl of gumbo. At one point, out of the corner of her eye, he had lifted a hand as if to slap her ass but lowered it when she turned on him and glared. He had just grinned. Lucy was incredibly grateful when her shift ended. Having Austin in the cafe the entire afternoon had been wearing, not to mention all the other tables she'd served. She mentally counted her tips as she changed back into the other sneakers. The rain had continued to fall steadily all day. A nice haul for a Wednesday afternoon, she thought. She stepped to the back door and looked out. The rain had let up some, now just a drizzle that wouldn't quite soak her as she walked the 2 blocks to her apartment. She sighed heavily, called out a goodbye to the other waitresses, and headed out. She looked around as she walked, ever conscious of the dangers of a big city. When she heard footsteps behind her, she halted and looked over her shoulder. A man was walking behind her, but he didn't seem to be following her. Lucy glanced around again as she started walking. The street was far from crowded, but there were people here and there hurrying along the sidewalk. But when she turned the corner of the street her apartment building was on, no one was in sight. She again glanced behind her at the man, who was still there but seemed preoccupied by his phone. Only 100 yards to her front stoop, she increased her pace. Her heart was pounding louder than it should, and the instinct to shift and defend herself was strong. Her mind kept telling her everything was fine, that she was overreacting, but her instincts were screaming danger. She'd never ignored her instincts before, and she didn't now. She broke into a run. The man did as well. He caught up to her quickly and easily, grabbed her arm and halted her progress. He pushed her up against a building and trapped her there with his arms on either side of her head. Hey, hot stuff, why the rush? Austin leaned close to her as he spoke, his alcohol breath expunging all other scents from her nostrils. Lucy pushed against him, but he didn't budge. Come on, Lucy. Aren't you glad to see me? No, Austin, I'm not. Step away from me before I scream, Lucy said calmly, refusing to panic yet. Scream? Why would you scream? He leaned in again and tried to kiss her, but she jerked to the side. He put his hands on either side of her face. I've been wanting to kiss those big lips and massage that big ass for weeks. Give me a chance, hot stuff. Lucy pushed his chest again, harder this time, and managed to throw him off balance a little. With that moment of advantage, she shoved past him and headed quickly for her building, now only about 50 yards away. She looked back at Austin, who had put his hand against the building for support. When he saw her looking, he ran after her. For a drunk man, he moved very quickly and had her arm in his grasp once again. When he pushed her against the wall again, she cracked her head against it hard. She saw spots briefly. When she'd regained her senses, he was groping her, feeling her breasts and kissing her neck. Her mind screamed in indignation as she shifted into her wolf form. She dropped to all fours and Austin nearly fell over. His face hit the wall. He yelped and put his hands over his face. Lucy moved behind him and waited to be noticed. Seconds later, he jerked around when she growled menacingly behind him. He stared at her wolf form, terror in his face. She didn't move. She didn't have to. He looked around, looking for Lucy the person, but she was gone. His mind, in its drunken haze, couldn't understand what had happened. Lucy the wolf growled again, louder this time. Austin lifted his hands in a defensive position, preparing for an attack. But Lucy did not move. She had no intention of injuring this man. She wasn't supposed to shift in the city. Attacking him would draw attention to her. When he didn't run away, she let out a quiet howl that ended in a frightening growl. She smelled urine. He'd pissed himself in fright. Her wolf face smiled, and Austin finally ran away. She chased him briefly, no more than 10 yards, then stopped and made a noise that sounded like a giggle. What do I do now? Lucy thought. She loped back to the spot where she'd shifted and looked at her ruined clothes and bag laying on the ground. Thank the gods I made some good tips today, she thought. She'd have to replace her work clothes. She decided to walk the rest of the way home in her wolf form, her bag in her mouth. The clothes were a lost cause, and if they were still there in the morning, she'd pick them up and put them in the trash. As she lifted the straps of her bag in her mouth, a shuffle from behind her caught her ears. She turned, and with her wolf vision saw a man in the shadows, watching her. Her first thought was Austin, but this man was taller and broader than Austin. He lounged against the wall, not moving, but she knew he watched her. She raised her snout to sniff the air, smelling the regular smells around her, but something else as well, something unfamiliar. Her nerves again screamed danger. She glanced at her apartment building, only 3 down from where she stood, and looked back at the man. Lucy didn't want him to know where she lived, regardless of who he was. He'd seen her shift. Therefore, he was a threat to her. She turned and ran away from the man, past her apartment, and into the park. She followed a convoluted route until she was sure no one was behind her or anyone near her. She'd had to duck behind hedges a time or two to prevent a human from seeing her, but overall it had been an easy, though long, escape route. When she returned to her street, she remained in the shadows watching for 15 minutes. A couple passed through the shadows where the man had been and disappeared inside a building. He was gone. Lucy shifted into her human form and ran across the street to her front stoop nude. No one was about as far as she could hear and see, but she hurriedly found her key and scrambled inside and up to her apartment. Only when she was inside, resting against the door, did she feel safe. Earlier that day, Nathan had entered Café Blue for a drink and something to eat. The pretty blonde who had waited on him had been incredibly helpful, but he was more interested in her dark-skinned friend. She'd smiled at him and dismissed him. He wasn't sitting at one of her tables and she had several customers waiting. He'd watched her handle the asshole with as much politeness as she could, and he'd watched the man leave when she did. Nathan had followed the man at a distance as he followed the woman. Nathan watched her as much as he watched the man. Her walk was graceful, and she held herself with confidence. The rain didn't bother her as it would some, and she'd lowered her umbrella and allowed the drizzle to wash over her gently. She's beautiful, he'd thought, and aware. He'd known the moment he'd walked into the cafe. He could smell her. When the man had attacked her, he'd almost shot forward and helped her. But he decided to see how she handled herself first. If she truly needed help, he'd step up. She hadn't, just as he'd known she wouldn't. The man had slammed her into the wall a second time, and she'd shifted to protect herself. No one had seen it but him, but that didn't mean she was in the clear. He'd watched her as she ran away, and he'd changed positions and watched her when she'd returned. His gut had told him she must live in one of the buildings on this street, and he'd been right. An hour after the attack, she'd come back, watched the street for a few minutes, and shifted into human form. Her naked body running across the street had entranced him. He hadn't been able to look away. He wanted to meet her, but he had a duty to attend to. He would have to report her presence to the guard. Hey there. Did you know that we've other hot romances like this that we want to release? But we need your help. Subscribing shows us that you're part of our journey and allows us to make more of these stories at a higher quality. So please, my queen, subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel now. Thanks. Now back to your story.
Chapter 2. After a shower to wash away the day's grime as well as the feel of Austin on her skin, Lucy threw herself on her bed and called Kayla. On the third ring, she answered. Hey, Luce, what's up? You will not believe what happened to me. Are you okay? You sound really weird, Kayla asked, her attention caught. She listened attentively. When Lucy told her about Austin slamming her into the wall and groping her, she erupted in fury. That son of a bitch! Did you call the police? He should go to jail for that shit. No. WH dash. Kayla interrupted. No? Are you crazy? You need to call the police. Or I'll get a cab and we'll go to the station. Kayla, just listen. I can't go to the police. Why not? I shifted, Lucy said quietly and heard Kayla gasp, then giggle. It's not funny. Whatever. It's hilarious. I bet that asshole nearly shit his pants. Well, he did piss his pants, Lucy said, the fear and loathing finally beginning to melt as she giggled along with her friend. This is why she loved Kayla. Their laughter mixed a few moments longer before Lucy continued. I'm worried, though. I think some man saw me shift. Is that a big deal? I'm not sure. I know we're not supposed to shift in the city. That was the big warning I got from everyone when I told them I was moving here. Huh. Probably because humans are stupid, Kayla replied thoughtfully. I mean, seriously, so many people pretend y'all don't even exist. Yeah, that's why I'm worried. I'm not positive he saw me shift, but he saw me scare Austin away for sure. I went into the park for a while so he could leave before I went to my apartment. I didn't want him to know where I live. Smart move, Kayla answered, and Lucy could picture her nodding her head. I think walking to your apartment isn't safe, especially if this stranger saw you. And what's more, what if Austin gets all vindictive or something when he sobers up tomorrow morning? Lucy asked, gnawing at her thumbnail. I mean, he was drunk, but he wasn't blackout drunk. Do you think he realized what happened? I'm really not sure. I slipped under him and moved around, and his face hit the wall. So he was holding his face when I shifted. I bet he doesn't realize what happened. And maybe he'll never come back to the cafe. That would be so freaking awesome I can't even begin to describe it. Lucy laughed in agreement. You're so right. I've got an early audition. What's your shift tomorrow? 5 to close. You? Same. Let's plan on sharing a cab, or maybe I'll just stay at your place or you can stay at mine. Safety first, friend, Kayla offered. Sounds good. We can decide tomorrow. Bye. Lucy ended the call, thinking. Kayla had lucked out. One of the other waitresses lived in the same building as her, so often she had someone to walk home with. But Lucy was the only one who lived in this direction. She always walked alone. She reached for the light and turned it off, musing over a handful of solutions to this problem. She didn't relish the idea of moving. She loved her apartment as well as her neighbors. This had always been a safe neighborhood, and the park was just across the street. She had some serious thinking to do. Nathan located the entrance to the underground headquarters of the guard quickly. He'd grown up in the city and knew the passages well. He'd worked for them for the past 10 years, investigating sightings of wers and other supernatural creatures who roamed the city. Part of his job was to make sure the new wers didn't expose them to the humans. Which is stupid, he thought, because they know we exist. But those were the rules, and part of his job was to enforce them. He headed straight for the head guard's office. The head, as he was more commonly referred as, had been the head for 2 decades, having succeeded the wer before him. The head had reached the age of 60 and was considering handing the reins over to someone else. He'd spoken to Nathan about it many times. He'd also spoken to Marissa about it. He shook his head, rearranging his thoughts so that Marissa was not in them. However, when he entered the head's office, she was there as if waiting for his report. "Ah, good morning, Nathan," the head spoke, his slightly accented voice quiet and unassuming, a voice that comforted or put fear into your soul, whichever he felt you needed. "Marissa and I were just saying you hadn't checked in lately." "I'm sure my whereabouts isn't top news," Nathan commented dryly, looking at Marissa, who sniffed and looked away. Marissa was another werecat, like Nathan, and the relationship they'd shared had run hot and fiery for about a year, then cooled quickly as she rose in the ranks of the guard while he remained a scout by his own preference. She couldn't understand why he wanted to remain on the streets when he could be the head's right-hand man, but that wasn't the life he'd wanted. So, she'd stepped into that slot and left him behind, desiring a man with more ambition than him. The head chuckled at his response. "Nathan, no one ever knows your whereabouts unless you come out of hiding." "And that's exactly how I like it," Nathan replied with a grin for his boss and friend as he took the chair next to Marissa. "I assume you have something to report?" Marissa asked, a bite in her tone. Nathan spared her a brief glance. He didn't report to her, he reported directly to the head. He was the only one who did, which was another thorn in Marissa's side. She sneered at him, but his grin remained in place. "I saw a new wer shift in public," Nathan began. The pair sat up a little straighter at the news, but Nathan lifted a hand to halt their questions. "She's a wolf. I've never seen her before, bet she hasn't been here long. I saw her at a cafe where she works and followed her home. On the way, one of her customers attacked her, with nefarious intentions in mind, I'm sure. She shifted to protect herself." "In front of this human?" Marissa asked, her eyebrow raised. "That's forbidden." "Thank you, Marissa, for the reminder," Nathan drawled. She glared at him, and the head hid his grin behind his hand. "She is unaware of the rules, I'm sure. And she only shifted to defend herself." "Doesn't matter." "She shouldn't have shifted," Marissa maintained. "There are other ways to prevent an assault. Human women have to do it all the time." "Have you ever had to do it?" "No?" "Then you really have no room to speak," Nathan griped. The head interrupted before their bickering became a full-blown fight. "Do you know her name? Where she lives?" Nathan cleared his throat of anger and answered his boss. "I know where she lives and where she works. With a little research, I'll know her name. You need to contact her, see if she'll come talk to us on her own," the head mused. "That's always easier. So many of the new ones get it in their heads that we're some kind of cult." He rolled his eyes slowly, his bushy brows wiggling. Once they learn we're here to protect them as well as the humans, most of them fall in line, Nathan reminded him. You're right, the head murmured quietly. He was tired of dealing with this. Retirement to the mountains was just over the horizon. Anyway, chat with her tomorrow, as soon as possible. Will do, Nathan said, rising to take his leave. Marissa also rose to leave, following Nathan out the door after they'd both said their goodbyes. Let us know immediately if she refuses to come in, Marissa ordered. Nathan raised an eyebrow at her. Again, thank you, Marissa. I know the protocol, but a little reminder. Every single time I come in is so helpful. Why are you such an asshole? Why are you such a bitch? You are so childish. Nathan's smile widened. Thanks. He turned to walk away and could feel her eyes trying to kill him. Stop looking at my ass, Marissa. He heard her growl a warning. I'm imagining a target on your back for my bullet. With his back to her, he continued walking away and called back, threats are so unbecoming of a lady, Marissa. He chuckled when she growled again. Marissa glared after him, then pulled out her cell phone and dialed her trusted assistant. I need you to follow Nathan tomorrow, watch him as he talks with this new where he just discovered. She listened for a moment. Yes, but I don't trust him with this one. Something is off. She listened again. Fine. Report to me. I don't think he will. Lucy spent the next day in her apartment, alternately cleaning and working on her project for her online class. The meeting was only 3 days away, and they were supposed to have a certain amount finished so they could show the professor. Lucy had wondered how Marla was going to present her partial project if she wasn't there, but that wasn't really her problem. She'd found it hard to concentrate at first, thinking instead of the events of last night. Shifting had been a mistake. If the police heard rumors about it, she could get into trouble if they figured out it was her. Anonymity was the best course, she'd been told time and again by her father, who had been born in the city and left as soon as he could. She remembered their conversation on her last day at home. Honey, I wish you'd reconsider, her father had pleaded. You don't understand the freedoms we have out here. City humans are intolerant of our kind, all words really. Dad, I know, but I can't stay here. I'm miserable. I want to be something other than a wife and mother in this camp. Her father had shaken his head at her, he understood, but he didn't like it. Just promise you'll be careful. Don't reveal yourself to anyone, not even if you're sure they're another were. Trust no one. Lucy shook her head, removing the thoughts before they took hold. She missed her family, thinking of them made her sad. But she wouldn't go back to the mountains. The freedoms here far outweighed the freedoms there. So she could only shift in her apartment and couldn't run free in the park. She could live without that, most of the time. Every now and then, she wished to get out in her wolf form, but she got over it. She glanced at the clock. 3:30, damn it, she thought, I have to be at work by 5 and I've only done about half of what I wanted to. She grumbled to herself and set an alarm on her phone for 4:15 so she could get ready for work and get there on time. She focused on her computer in front of her and let all other thoughts drain away as she typed another sentence. Lucy rushed into the back door of the cafe at 4:58. Her boss, Jeff, just happened to be exiting his office when she did. He glanced at her, then at his watch. Cutting it a little close, there, Lucy, Jeff carefully commented. Lucy narrowed her eyes at him. I'm not late, Jeff. I'm 2 minutes early. He nodded his agreement and continued through the door into the dining area. Lucy mumbled under her breath as she tied on her apron and put her notepad and pencil in the pocket. The door opened again, and Kayla flew in, her ponytail flying behind her. "He's out front. Be glad he's not back here. I was 2 minutes early and he gave me shit." "Crap, he must be in a mood," Kayla said, looking over her shoulder to make sure he wasn't close by. "Let's get out front and pretend we're the happiest waitresses in all the land." Lucy snickered as they walked through the door. The cafe was about half full, and Lucy grabbed Tiffany to explain her tables to her before she left since she'd be taking over her area. She listened closely. She hated shift change when there were already people at tables. She didn't always remember everything, and that lowered the tip. Luckily, there were only 2 tables in Tiffany's section, an old couple who came in all the time who seemed to be finishing up, and a man by himself sipping coffee. "The dude by himself has been here about 15 minutes. He's a weird one, for sure," Tiffany claimed as she untied her apron. "Weird how?" Lucy questioned, glancing his way. "Just weird. He's only ordered coffee, doesn't plan to order anything else as far as I can tell," Tiffany explained. "Don't look for a big tip." "Not a good way to start the night," Lucy grumbled under her breath, but put on a smile as she grabbed the coffee pot and headed for the tables. Lucy greeted the old couple, asking if there was anything else they needed. She didn't know their names but did know their favorites because they came in so often. "No chocolate cake tonight?" "Ah, young lady, you know our weakness," the old lady murmured, smiling a big smile. "We'll share a piece, please." "Of course. I'll be right back with that and 2 forks." She winked at them and moved to the man by himself. As she approached, though, she froze. She recognized his scent from the night before, that strange smell she'd been unable to place after Austin had run away. He must have realized she was there. He lifted his head and looked at her. Their eyes met. Lucy's eyes widened. He was gorgeous, but he was also dangerous, she was sure of it. He watched her stand there, holding the coffee pot, obviously on her way to greet him and offer him more. She looked at the coffee pot in her hand, turned, and walked away. "Kayla, I need you to take the table with the single guy at it," Lucy hissed at her best friend. Kayla glanced at him. He was watching them. She looked quickly away and said, "He's watching you." "Who is he?" "I think he's the person I saw after shifting last night," Lucy said quietly. She could feel him looking at her. "I got bad news, sister," Kayla said. "He was here yesterday." "I'm surprised you didn't see him." Lucy's mind screamed at her to get away, but she couldn't. Kayla sensed her panic and put her hand on her shoulder. "Hey, I'll take the table, no worries. Maybe it's just a coincidence." "I don't think so." "I'm not going near that guy," Lucy said, glancing back at him. He was no longer looking at her but out the window at the passing traffic. "I'll take one of yours until he leaves." "I only have one right now." "The rush hasn't started yet, so don't worry about it," Kayla assured her. "I'm sure he'll leave soon. All he's having is coffee." Lucy handed the coffee pot to Kayla and retrieved the cake and 2 forks for the old couple. She also retrieved her smile and her nerve. She would ignore him for as long as he was there, and maybe he wouldn't speak to her. But she felt his eyes on her over the next 30 minutes as he sat and sipped his coffee. She couldn't help herself. She looked at him several times to see if he was actually looking at her. He was. By the time he left, she was a bundle of nerves, screaming at her to run away. A physical weight lifted off her shoulders when she saw him rise, leave bills on the table, and walk out the front door without a glance in her direction. Kayla walked over to her. "I was hoping he'd pay with a card so we'd know his name, but he paid in cash." Lucy nodded. I saw. He stared at me the whole time. Did you see that? I did. So weird. Maybe he has a crush on you? That guy? I doubt it. That tall drink of water wouldn't date me. He's almost as pretty as those actors you talk about, Lucy joked, hoping to relieve her stress even more. It worked a little. That blonde hair and those blue eyes did make me drool a little. I wouldn't mind having a stalker who looks like a surfer dude, Kayla mused. Lucy laughed loudly. While there's a bit of a lull, I'm going to grab a bite. Be back in 5, then you can go. Sounds good, Kayla called as she headed off to answer a customer's summons. Lucy called out to Jeff, Jeff. I'm taking 5 before the rush. Jeff waved a hand at her from the bar and yelled, hurry so Kayla can go. Don't dawdle. Yes sir, she replied, although the way she said sir should have been clear that she didn't mean sir. She hurried to the restroom and took care of business, grabbed a bowl of gumbo, then out back for a breath of fresh air. She sat down on the stoop with the bowl in her hands and looked through her Facebook as she rested her feet and ate. So absorbed was she that she didn't notice the stranger approach her until he was within 5 feet. Lucy jerked up, nearly dropping her phone and the bowl of gumbo. She made a step towards the door when she recognized him, but he called to her. She slipped her phone in her pocket. The bowl of hot gumbo would go in his face if he tried anything. Lucy! Wait. His voice was deep and low, without any kind of accent whatsoever. She stared at him as if he were an alien. I need to talk to you. How the hell do you know my name? I heard your friend say it, Nathan lied smoothly. He'd done his research, he knew everything about her, where she was from, how long she'd lived in the city, what classes she was taking, everything. But she didn't need to know that right now. Lucy snorted. Listen, I don't know who you are or what you want, but I can assure you I don't want it. She turned to leave, but he halted her steps with his next words. I saw you shift last night, Lucy. She turned back and stared at him. Her anger rose, defensive and nearly ugly. You've been following me? What the hell do you want? I can tell you right now, I have no money to pay you off, so if that's what you want, you're out of luck. Nathan shook his head and her naivety. Lucy, I'm a were as well. Can't you smell me? Lucy glared at him for his condescending tone. Actually, all I can smell is this dumpster. He rolled his eyes at her and stepped closer, causing her to step back. He lifted a hand. I just want to get closer to you so you can smell me. I have something important to discuss with you. Lucy looked back at the door to the cafe, debating. She could get away if she needed to, and Sammy would hear her if she screamed. The door didn't close all the way, so the sound could travel through the crack. She put the bowl of gumbo on the stoop. She looked at Nathan again. What's your name? She asked. Nathan. Nathan, huh? She questioned. Okay, Nathan, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and take a whiff. Do not lift your hands from your sides. Agreed. She stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his face as if she was waiting for a sign of aggression. He looked back at her blandly, waiting patiently for her to sniff him. He admired her for her caution, especially after what had happened to her last night. But he knew she'd frozen earlier in the cafe because she'd recognized his smell, no matter how briefly she'd smelled it last night. When she was close enough, she lifted her nose and drew in a deep breath. She smelled the animal scent mixed with human. She heard him smell her as well and looked up at him. Their eyes held for several seconds longer than was necessary before she broke it and stepped back. She knew the smell he emitted was a worse smell, but she couldn't distinguish which kind. Not a werewolf, she knew that. What are you? She asked suspiciously. Nathan stared at her for a moment, mesmerized by her smell and beauty so close. Earlier, he'd been staring at her not because he wanted to talk to her, but because she was so lovely she almost hurt his eyes. Hello? I asked you a question. Lucy spoke loudly. He realized he'd been staring at her. He shook himself and apologized. Sorry. I'm a werewolf. And you're a werewolf. Opposites attract, he joked. Lucy narrowed her eyes at him. Not into humor. I'll keep that in mind. What do you want to talk to me about? I have to get back to work before my boss notices. You're new to the city, relatively. You are probably unaware that wers are governed by certain rules. The Guard, a group of wers, is kind of the police of wers here and make sure we're safe as well as playing it safe. They want to speak with you about what happened last night. You mean when Austin attacked and nearly assaulted me and I shifted to defend myself? Lucy asked. That's the whole story. Apparently you were there and reported me. Tell them what you saw. Yes, I was there, and yes, I did report you. That's my job, Nathan replied slowly. However, the head likes to speak with all newcomers about the rules and such. It's as much for your safety as for any other reason. Lucy considered his statement. I didn't do anything wrong. I saved myself from a pervert and no one saw me but you. I understand the rules. I don't need to see these people. Lucy, it will be so much easier if you go on your own. They'll come to you if you don't go see them. That could be embarrassing. Come to me? Like kidnap me? Lucy gasped. What kind of group is this? Sounds like a damn cult or something. Nathan sighed. He'd approached her in the wrong way. It's not a cult. Listen, I mind my own business. I don't bother anyone. I've shifted once in public since I've been here, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal, Lucy responded rationally. Please explain to them that I understand and it won't happen again. But I won't go with you. It's perfectly safe, Nathan told her. I'm sure it is, but I prefer to keep to myself. I don't want to be a part of your group, she explained. She turned to go back into the cafe. I have to go back to work. Wait. He stepped up to her and grabbed her around the neck. Before she could protest, he pressed his mouth to hers, holding her close to him. She stiffened, but as his tongue snuck into her mouth, she felt herself responding to the kiss. She couldn't stop herself. His smell was intoxicating this close, and rather than pull away, she melted into him. He felt her surrender and wrapped his arms tightly around her. Her arms snaked around his neck, her finger twining in that beautiful blonde hair. The back door of the cafe opened and Kayla stepped out. Lucy jerked away from him, her hand going to her kiss-swollen lips. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Jeff told me to tell you to get your ass in here, Kayla said, her eyebrows high, her eyes wide as she looked from Lucy to Nathan and back. I'm on my way, Lucy said quietly. Kayla stepped back inside, but Lucy knew she'd be right by the door to catch her for details as soon as she walked in. Lucy returned her attention to Nathan. I have to go. Tell your guard people what I said. I promise I'll be more careful. She walked in without a backwards glance.
Chapter 3. Nathan watched Lucy disappear through the back door and heard her friend's immediate questioning. He smiled. He liked the idea that her friend was so excited. He turned slowly, thinking about the way she tasted. He'd never tasted someone like her, and it had nothing to do with the spicy gumbo she'd been eating before he interrupted her. She hadn't finished, he mused. She would get hungry as her shift continued. He felt a little guilty about that. But her lips, soft, plump, and sweet, moving on his as if they'd kissed a million times. He touched his lips the way she'd touched hers, and he wished he could repeat the kiss. I'll find a way, he thought. He had to get her to the guard of her own volition. Maybe he could take her to dinner, discuss the guard more thoroughly, and take her to see the head after. He walked in front of the cafe so he could look in the window. She was speaking to a pair of men, laughing at a joke one of them had told her. Her smile remained on her face as she took their order. Nathan was so absorbed by her smile, he didn't notice the were across the street, pulling out a cell phone. Marissa answered her phone the moment it rang. Hello. He spoke with her in the alley behind the cafe where she works. Her assistant informed her in place of a greeting, as she preferred. She was not receptive to his polite request to visit the guard of her own accord. And Marissa was irritated already. Protocol said that a were who wouldn't come would be escorted by the one who found her. Is Nathan on his way here with her? Her assistant cleared his throat nervously. He knew that tone. No. Marissa arched an eyebrow. He was hiding something from her, she could tell. Bobby, please give me all the information. I can tell you're leaving something out. Bobby sighed quietly. Nathan kissed her before she went back in. Marissa stiffened. Her silence screamed in Bobby's ear. He was aware of her former relationship with Nathan and that it had ended badly. He waited for her orders. No words, he said, would be welcome at this time. Thank Bobby, Marissa murmured quietly, dangerously. I'll handle it from here. You may go about your business. The phone beeped in his ear, indicating she'd cut him off. He sighed. The dismissal made him happy. He could go home and relax. He glanced at the cafe and watched Nathan finally walk away. He could see Lucy inside, gracefully delivering orders. He felt sorry for her. Marissa was pissed. After closing and cleaning, Lucy knocked on her boss door. Kayla was waiting for her by the door and gave her an encouraging nod. Jeff called, "Come in," and Lucy opened the door and stepped inside. Hey, Jeff, Lucy said quietly. Jeff could be intimidating in his assholeness. Can I talk to you for a minute? Without looking up from the money he was counting, he said, Give me 1 minute. Lucy nodded. She stood there awkwardly, watching him counting the money and adding up figures. He entered the sums into a spreadsheet, saved it, and shut the computer down. Finally, he looked at her. What do you need, Lucy? She stared at him for a second before speaking. I was wondering if I can trade shifts and work days for a while. Jeff's brows furrowed and he tilted his head to look at her. Why? Better tips at night. I know, but I've had some issues with a guy. He's been following me around. Not really a lie. Not the whole truth. I'm scared he's going to do something to me, and I have to walk home alone. Jeff looked at her, no sympathy in his eyes. So why don't you just take a cab? It's only 2 blocks, and I don't want to pay for one. If it's only 2 blocks, it shouldn't be that expensive, he replied, rising and gathering his things to go home. Listen, I understand what you're going through, but I can't give you a day shift. Those are all taken by people who have been here a lot longer than you. Lucy's shoulders dropped. She'd known his answer before she'd asked, but she'd asked anyway. Okay. Thanks anyway. Jeff put his hand on his shoulder and led her out of his office and to the door. As he locked the back door, he said, Get some mace or maybe a stun gun. Best thing you can do. He pointed at Kayla. Or the 2 of you get a place together so you can walk home together. Lucy and Kayla watched him walk down the back alley, whistling to himself. Lucy turned to look at Kayla and said, That guy is going to make some woman a very good husband someday. Kayla snorted. Even better, he'll be an amazing father. They giggled together and turned to walk to Lucy's place. They had agreed, for the time being, that they would trade off walking the other home and split the cab money each night. Luckily, they wouldn't have to do it every night. So tell me about that guy, Kayla urged. We didn't get to say much about it. Lucy had hoped Kayla wouldn't ask, but she knew better. Nathan hadn't said the guard was a secret, but she had decided not to mention that part to Kayla. She would not go see them, but she was planning to do some research if she could. She knew a few words here and planned to seek them out the next day, her day off, and ask a few questions. He apparently thought I was pretty and wanted to ask me out, Lucy explained. It wasn't a totally unbelievable lie. He had been watching her, after all, and Kayla had noticed it. Really? Kayla said, a smirk on her face. She wiggled her eyebrows. I certainly hope you said yes. I did, yes, so he kissed me. Then you walked out, Lucy said pointedly, lifting an eyebrow at her. Oh no. Would you have changed your mind after the kiss? A non-committal shrug answered the question. Kayla bumped her shoulder. Oh, come on. Maybe. He is awfully cute, Lucy replied with a giggle. They'd arrived at her apartment building without incidents. Want to come up? I better not. I'm exhausted and need my beauty sleep, Kayla smiled. She looked around and mumbled, There are no cabs around. I'll call you one. They're usually here within 5 minutes. Lucy offered, her phone already out. After disconnecting, they sat on the stoop and waited. So, I think maybe we ought to talk about getting a place together. What do you think? Kayla nodded, looking up and down the street for the cab. I like the idea, honestly. Save money, safer, blah blah. She glanced at Lucy and asked, Does your building have 2 or 3 bedroom apartments? I like this neighborhood better than mine. You've got a park. I think so. I'll have to ask the manager, Lucy replied. She pointed at the building across the street. That building does, but the rent is outrageous. I'm not sure why, though. I bet the apartments have fancier decorations, Kayla mused. My apartment is fancy, Lucy defended. Fancier than yours, anyway. Does it still smell like cabbage in the hallway? Shut up. It's cheap, Kayla sniffed. I'm an up-and-coming actress. I have to suffer through poor living conditions before I make it big, so I have something interesting to tell Ellen. The cab pulled up as they laughed. Lucy handed Kayla a 10 from her tips, told her she'd call her tomorrow to talk about moving, and waved goodbye. She turned quickly to get in the building before the cab drove away. She hated that she was afraid of being alone in her own neighborhood after dark. This was a safe neighborhood. That's why she'd chosen it. And now she was scared because of one almost rapist and a semi-stalker. She shook her head as she checked her mailbox before heading up the stairs. Once in her apartment, she put the mail on the bar and went directly to her room for a shower. She felt sticky after the long shift, and even though it was after 2, she couldn't sleep when she was all sweaty. As she stepped into the shower, her thoughts wandered to Nathan and their discussion as well as their kiss. Nathan had told her the guard would come to her if she didn't go see them, but she just didn't think it was necessary. She understood the rules and would follow them religiously so as not to stir up trouble. The city was filled with people who didn't like wers. She was aware of that. Protecting herself from their hatred was right up there with protecting herself from a would-be rapist. She wouldn't shift and she'd be protected from the first. She'd follow Jeff's advice and get a stun gun to avoid the second. No shifting. Got it. But that kiss, Lucy thought with a sigh of longing. That kiss had hit her in the stomach like no other kiss ever had. Her lips had felt the pressure of his for several minutes after the kiss had ended. She wanted to kiss him again and again. She wanted more than that, actually.
Oh no, it's about to get hot.
But we can't put this on YouTube as they don't allow it. I'm sorry.
But check the description of this video to join Romancely Audio Velvet and get the steamy scenes in future.
If you're already a member, the love scene reference is That Shifter Love, Chapter 3, Love Scene 1.
Okay, back to the story.
Sighing, she turned off the water and climbed out of the shower. She grabbed a fluffy, purple towel and patted her face. She finished drying and turned off the light in the bathroom, her thoughts drifting from important things like protecting herself and Nathan's kiss to how heavenly her bed looked at that moment. She walked in the darkness to her bed and laid down naked, asleep within minutes. Lucy woke slowly from a dream she vaguely remembered. Whatever had happened in the dream, it had put a smile on her face that she was pretty sure had nothing to do with unicorns and butterflies. A certain sexy workat in the shape of a surfer boy had made a cameo. She was sure of it. She lay in her bed, eyes closed, and told herself the story of their dreamland encounter. Nathan lay on his back in the meadow near her childhood home, arms crossed behind his head. His eyes were closed, but she knew he was awake. He was smiling beautifully at whatever lovely image was in his mind. "Stop staring at me," he whispered to her, his eyes unopened. "I can feel it."
Hi there. Unfortunately, we've had to take this steamy scene out as it's against YouTube's terms of service.
If you don't want to miss out on love scenes in future stories, check the description and join Romancely Audio Velvet. If you're already a member, the love scene reference is That Shifter Love, Chapter 3, Love Scene 2.
Okay, back to the story.
Her phone rang next to her, interrupting her thoughts. Damn it, she griped in her mind as she reached for the phone. She glanced at the screen before answering and sighed. "Hi, Mom," she mumbled sleepily so her mother would realize she had been sleeping. "Oh, honey, did I wake you?" She sighed again. "I worked the late shift last night. Sorry about that," her mother chirped. "So, how have you been?" "Fine," she replied, sitting up and searching for her robe before actually getting out of bed. "What's up?" "Not much. Just hadn't heard from you in a while and wondered how you were doing." "Just school and work, really. Nothing exciting," Lucy told her. She would not tell her parents about the incident with Austin or the guard wanting to speak to her. Neither of them really wanted her in the city to begin with, and information like that would only encourage them to berate her about returning home. "Do you need any money? I know it's expensive there." Lucy smiled. They may hate that she's here, but they always offered to help her. She hadn't needed to take their money for a while, but when she'd first moved here, she had struggled, so they still offered regularly. "I'm good, Mom. Been getting really good tips the last few weeks," Lucy said as she put on her robe and wandered to the kitchen for some coffee. "School is getting harder, though. I bet, but you'll be fine, I'm sure," her mother responded. Lucy could tell the real reason for the call was coming. "So Daryl stopped by the camp today." "Yep, there it was." "So?" "He asked about you again," her mother hinted. "Mom, we've talked about that. I am not going to live on the side of a mountain and have a litter of pups with that man. He's not smart enough for me." "Lucy, that is cruel." "He's not stupid," her mother admonished. "No, he's not, but he's not as smart as I am," Lucy reaffirmed. "I like the city and I plan to stay here and work here." Her mother huffed into the phone. "You've always been too independent for your own good." "Thanks, I think," Lucy replied, eliciting a chuckle from her mother. "Listen, honey, I'm in town getting supplies and need to get back. I love you. Dad says hi and he loves you too. Bye, Mom. Love y'all." An hour after hanging up with her mother, Lucy changed into jeans and a tee. She was grateful for the day off today. She had a ton of errands to get done. Not only did she have to go shopping for new clothes after ruining hers when Austin had attacked her, she also needed groceries. She'd been living the single life, eating frozen dinners or takeout for the last few days because she hadn't felt like going to the market. Lucy actually enjoyed cooking and created recipes regularly. However, she'd have to eat the same meal for 3 or 4 days since she lived alone, and after the first 2, she would get tired of eating the same thing. She felt guilty about it, but on the 3rd day, she almost always threw her concoction in the trash. As she walked out of her apartment, she grabbed the full trash bag, her purse, and locked the door behind her. She threw the garbage in the chute as she walked by. She waved at her elderly neighbor, who was coming in, and hurried out. The day was beautiful, so she decided a route to the market through the park was the perfect direction to take. Lucy raised her nose into the air and took a deep breath as she walked through the entrance of the park. She smelled only the regular smells of the park. No whirs. Couple dogs, but no whirs. She breathed a sigh of relief and set off across the park, following the jogging path. She made sure to stay to one side so she didn't interrupt any joggers taking advantage of the beautiful day. A man with his dog was walking in her direction on the path. The dog froze when it saw her. It raised its snout, similarly to how she's lifted her nose a few moments ago. She watched it warily as it sniffed in her direction. The man wasn't paying attention to his dog, had assumed it had stopped to lift a leg. The dog lowered its snout and looked at her, then began to wag its tail and pull its owner in her direction. Lucy sighed with relief. Dogs could smell her wolfness. Some liked her, some didn't. This one nearly dragged its owner to the ground trying to get to her. She knelt and rubbed his neck, smiling up at the older man. He apologized for his dog. She said it was all right, and they went on their way. The encounter left her with a mile-wide smile as she walked on towards the market. I don't think I feel like shopping for clothes today, Lucy mused. I can go tomorrow before work. She wanted to buy some yummy ingredients and spend the afternoon in her kitchen creating a sumptuous meal for herself and maybe Kayla. She could remember Kayla's shift, so she'd call her later. Lucy looked around. The park was empty. Most of those who visited were at work or school at this time of day. The occasional retiree, like the old man with his dog, wandered through, but otherwise she was alone. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Something was off. She stopped walking and peered around more carefully this time, searching the strange shadows. She saw nothing, but something was wrong. She could feel it. The last time she'd felt this way, Austin had attacked her. Panic settled in her stomach. She picked up the pace, nearly running. Her mouth opened in preparation to scream if necessary. The old man couldn't have gotten far. Lucy didn't get far. Two men stepped in front of her. She halted, skidding a foot and nearly falling backwards. She could smell them now. Two words, although she couldn't decipher what kind. She stared at them. One stepped toward her while the other moved slightly to the left. The closest spoke to her. "Hello, Lucy. We need you to come with us." "No." The other one grinned frighteningly at her. "You see, Lucy, it's not really your decision whether or not you go." Lucy stared at him, debating her options. She needed to think. She glanced back towards where the old man had disappeared. No one was around to assist her. "Listen, Lucy, you're coming with us one way or the other," the first one said to her. From beneath his jacket, he pulled out a gun. "If you shift, I will shoot you with this. A powerful sedative will be injected into your body, and you'll be out for at least 24 hours. Where are you taking me?" "You've been told the guard wishes to see you." "Wishes to see me? Or wishes to kidnap me?" Lucy asked skeptically. She'd developed a plan, but the idea of a 24-hour nap had ended that idea. The second one chuckled and moved closer and a little more to the left. While Lucy's attention was on that one, the first moved closer as well. "This doesn't have to be difficult, Lucy. Come with us now and you'll be home within 2 hours." Lucy stood there a moment too long, her indecisiveness annoying the second one. He jumped at her, grabbing her arm. She twisted away from him and turned to run, her powerful thighs carrying her quickly away. The first one cursed loudly and chased her, gaining on her quickly and tackling her from behind. His weight slammed her to the ground, knocking the breath out of her. The fight left her when her breath did. She felt the man jerk her arms behind her and cuff her wrists. A blindfold was placed around her eyes, a gag in her mouth. Then they hefted her up. No more than 10 steps later, she was tossed onto the floor of what she assumed was a van.
Chapter 4. Lucy tried to count the number of turns they took as they drove through town, but she couldn't focus. Her fear was too great. "Only want to talk to me? Bullshit," she thought. She tried to change her focus to listen to the sounds outside the vehicle, to no avail. The van wasn't soundproof, but the sounds of the road weren't going to help her figure out where they were. She pushed against the gag in her mouth with her tongue, hoping to loosen it so when they did stop she could scream. She twisted her wrists to see if there was any give in the cuffs, maybe just enough room to pull one hand out. Nope. But she refused to relax. No one touched her as they drove through town, nor did either of the men speak again. They had no need to speak, their part in this was almost over. Lucy thought about shifting into her wolf form, but with her hands cuffed behind her back, she was afraid she'd pull her shoulders out of socket and be completely defenseless. "I may heal quickly, but not quickly enough to take care of myself," she mused. Her heart had settled into a more normal rhythm. She kept telling herself everything was going to be okay. Nathan had explained to her the night before that all they wanted to do was talk to her about shifting in front of Austin. He'd even warned her that they would come to her if she didn't go on her own. She hadn't realized he'd meant attack her in the park, cuff her, gag her, blindfold her, and throw her in a van like a mafia-style kidnapping. Fear added beats to her heart's rhythm when the van pulled to a stop and died. The doors opened and slammed, then the back door opened and someone grabbed her shoulders. She started jerking her body, shaking her head back and forth, screaming at them to let her go through the gag. A gentle tap on her cheek stopped her movements. "Lucy, calm down. No one is going to hurt you here," the kidnapper's voice said. "I'm going to set you on your feet. We will guide you inside, then remove the gag and blindfold. If you fight, you'll only hurt yourself. Do you understand?" Lucy grumbled a perfectly clear insult used by sailors at the man, but she did nod her head that she understood. She continued to mumble through the gag as they marched her through a door and into a building that smelled of cleanliness and office supplies. As soon as the door whispered shut behind her, the blindfold was removed and Lucy looked at her surroundings. The lobby in which they stood was modern and sleek with clear lines and simple decorations in various colors to break up the monotony of silver, black, and white. She glanced back at the door as one of the kidnappers removed the gag. 2 security guards stood on either side of the door, sentries protecting those within from those outside. Both were wers, although she wasn't sure which kind. She'd never been good at detecting the distinct odors of each species. She knew what wers smelled like, and she could usually identify a werewolf, just not wercats, werbears, or any other. That had always suited her just fine, until today when it could help her find allies in the strange situation in which she'd found herself. "Come on, Lucy. We'll take you down to meet with the head and Marissa. They're waiting for you," the kidnapper said. "Remove the handcuffs, please," Lucy asked, turning her back to the man, arms slightly extended. He chuckled at her. "Not just yet. We know you can't shift with your hands cuffed for fear of injuring yourself. Therefore, until given the order, handcuffed you will be." "Well, shit," Lucy remarked, eliciting another chuckle from the pair. "So these people are expecting me?" The other kidnapper nodded, gestured towards the elevator, and waited for her to precede him. Lucy looked at the elevator and back at the door, once again calculating the idea of escape. She shook her head at herself and moved toward the elevator as if she were ascending to a job interview rather than into the unknown. Marissa stared at the woman on the screen. The security cameras had been zoomed in to closely look at the woman Nathan had not brought to them last night. She was beautiful, bountiful, and bombshell gorgeous. Those ample breasts and thick, muscular thighs were positively eye-catching, and her face was that of a Nubian goddess. Her eyes dominated that face, large and dark, seeing everything in seconds. Everything about the woman was gorgeous, and Marissa was not happy about it. She seethed quietly, watching Lucy as she marched purposefully into the elevator. Marissa hit a button, and the inside of the elevator popped up on the screen. She watched as surprise passed over Lucy's face when the elevator descended rather than ascended and smiled. Good, she thought, let her feel fear again. Marissa walked away from the screens and down the hall to the head's office to announce Lucy's arrival. She knocked briefly and stepped in without waiting for a response. She gasped quietly when Nathan turned to look at her. She looked from Nathan to the head, who looked perturbed. Good morning, Nathan sneered at her. I understand you've been busy this morning. Nathan had awakened that morning with the sense that he should go into the office today. He rarely did unless he had something to report or needed help with a particularly problematic issue. But his intuition had awakened him, screaming loudly that he needed to go to the office and meet with the head. He'd always trusted his intuition, even as a child. It had never steered him in the wrong direction. He'd quickly showered and dressed and was sitting in the head's office by 8:30. On his way up, he'd done a little investigating, questioning this one and that about what was going on this morning. He'd found the answer while eavesdropping on two unsuspecting werbears drinking their coffee. Marissa had a couple of the security guys pick up a werewolf who's been shifting in front of the humans. Nathan's ears had perked up. He'd stopped just out of sight and listened. Really? What an idiot. Is he new in town or something? She. And I don't think so, the other replied between sips of coffee. I'm not really sure, but they were supposed to go get her this morning. How exciting! We haven't had anything fun happen around here in ages. Let's go watch when they bring her in, the other said, giggling. We better not. You know how Marissa can be. So true, the other sighed. Well, coffee break is over, I guess. Indignation moved through Nathan's mind like lightning. He had planned to go see Lucy again today and convince her to come to the office with him and meet the head. He was sure he could convince her, especially after the kiss they'd shared. Marissa had sent two of her goons to kidnap her, a highly illegal practice that could have involved humans if any had seen the actual kidnapping take place. And, if Lucy were so inclined, she could speak to the police and involve the humans intentionally. Nathan didn't think she would, but she certainly had that right after being kidnapped off the street. Marissa had collected her thoughts quickly, considering the two men looking at her both seemed angry. She smirked at Nathan's question. I have been busy, she replied haughtily, doing your job for you. My job has never entailed kidnapping, Nathan retorted, his anger barely under control. He felt an extreme need to shift but held back. Not a good idea, he reminded himself. Marissa meandered over to the empty chair next to him and sat on the edge, smiling at the head as if she couldn't tell he was angry, or at the very least, irritated, with her. Your job is to bring in werewolves who don't follow our laws. You failed to do so. She was asked nicely by the men I sent. She refused to cooperate. Kidnapping anyone is against the law. Both were inhuman, Marissa, Nathan reminded her. We've used this method many times before, Nathan, Marissa retorted. Why are you so angry this time? Nathan didn't answer her question. He asked his own. Why did you send men the next day? Usually we give them a week to come in on their own. Marissa shook her hair back and rolled her eyes, buying a moment to think of an excuse. She did not want Nathan to realize she was jealous of this woman. Marissa, I think you've overstepped today, the head admonished. Marissa opened her mouth to protest, but he held up his hand. This woman was only invited once. She was not given the chance to come in of her own volition. Marissa stared at him, trying to keep her face impassive rather than furious. She looked down at the floor before answering. I understand. The buzz of the head's phone stopped their conversation. He lifted it and listened. Send them in, please. The door behind Nathan and Marissa opened, and Lucy marched in, her kidnappers behind her. When she saw Nathan, her nostrils flared in anger and she nearly spat at him. She looked at the other two people in the room briefly before returning her attention to him. What the hell, Nathan? Lucy snarled. This is what you meant by they'll come to me? This is fucking ridiculous. That guy tackled me like a common criminal. All eyes turned to the where she'd indicated. The head lifted an eyebrow at him. I apologize, sir. She ran. We didn't want to stun her and knock her out, so the tackle seemed the best option at that moment. The head nodded his head. I understand your choice, but please apologize to Lucy and remove the handcuffs. She poses no threat here. Lucy raised an eyebrow at him as if to indicate he shouldn't be so positive about that, but she remained silent as the man removed the cuffs. She jerked away from him the moment he released her, standing as far from every other person in the room as she could get. Nathan rose. Lucy. He stopped when she whipped her head around to glare at him. He lifted his hands in a defensive gesture. I'm sorry this happened. It wasn't supposed to. You were supposed to have a week to consider, but someone jumped the gun. He looked at Marissa, who blandly stared at Lucy. Lucy's eyes moved to the woman. Hatred stared at her. I do not appreciate being treated like this. I have done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong? Marissa sniffed. You shifted in front of a human. That is against our laws. And do your laws not take into account defensive need? Lucy asked derisively. A man attacked me, slammed my head into a wall, and would have assaulted me on the street had I not shifted. Nathan knows all this. He saw it. All eyes shifted to Nathan. I explained the circumstances clearly to everyone in this room, Lucy. He looked at the head, ignoring Marissa completely. I watched the man attack her and was going to step in when she shifted. No one saw her but this man, and he was so drunk I'm sure he questions what he actually saw. The head opened his mouth to speak, but Marissa answered. Regardless. She should not have shifted on a public street where anyone could have seen her. She rose and looked at Lucy. For newcomers, which you sort of are, we give a warning the first time. However, if you dash. Lucy interrupted. Nathan explained your damned law to me. I'm not stupid, I understood it when he explained and do not need another explanation. Marissa glared at her, stepping forward with a finger pointed at Lucy's chest. Listen here, girl. You will follow our laws or you will suffer the consequences. Lucy stepped forward as well. Don't threaten me, bitch. I know the human law as well. What you did today is illegal, and you know it. Are you threatening to involve humans in our affairs? Marissa yelled, moving another step closer. Nathan stepped between the two women, both of whom were shaking in anger. The head rose to defuse the situation. Ladies, please. He looked at Marissa. Marissa, this situation is getting out of hand because of your actions today. You and I will discuss this later, but for now, I'd like to have a calm discussion with Lucy. That won't happen if you're in here. Marissa gaped at her boss, she was being dismissed. And in front of Nathan and Lucy. Her anger spiked again, but she remained silent. Without a word, she turned and walked out of the office, slamming the door behind her. The head sighed loudly and returned to his chair. He indicated the chairs in front of him as he spoke. Please be seated, you two. Let's start over and have a normal conversation. Nathan sat down and looked back at Lucy, who hadn't moved. Her fists were clenched, her jaw was clenched, and her eyes were closed. She was visibly trying to relax before continuing the conversation. Nathan's respect for her jumped up a notch. Beautiful and classy, he thought. Lucy opened her eyes, both men were watching her. She was instantly embarrassed by her behavior. She knew better than to behave in such a fashion. She took a deep, calming breath before speaking. Gentlemen, I apologize for my reaction. Although I feel that I'm completely entitled to be angry, I shouldn't have lashed out. The head raised his eyebrows at her, surprise clear on his face. He looked at Nathan, who grinned at him. Your apology is not necessary, Lucy. Marissa shouldn't have sent those men or gave them permission to treat you so roughly. You will receive a written apology from her. Don't bother with that, Lucy said. She won't mean it and it will only make the situation worse. I hope I never see her again, so it shouldn't matter. The head chuckled. You're probably right. We'll leave it alone then. Thank you, Lucy answered. So, I understand the law. Is there any other reason I'm here? Actually, yes, the head replied, leaning forward in his chair, his chin resting on his hand. The guard is not here only to make wers follow the law. We also protect our own. The humans, though they know we exist, do not like to admit it. So we play their little game and remain in hiding, somewhat. Lucy nodded. My mother is from the city. She warned me about all the rules and such, although she didn't say a word about your organization. Is that the correct term? That's fine, of course, the head replied. What is your mother's name? Maybe I knew her, we'd be close to the same age, I bet. Lucy smiled and nodded her head. Yes, I think so. Her name is Marianne. Her maiden name was Curran. The head and Nathan exchanged a quick look. Lucy looked between them and asked, Did you know her? Not well, but I knew of her, the head replied with a smile to cover the turmoil in his mind. He rose. Well, I think that's all, Lucy. Please let us know if you need anything, and no more shifting. She smiled at his gentle admonishment and rose as well. I will and I won't. Nathan will escort you home, the head offered. He'll also give you the number to call if you should need anything. Thank you, sir, Lucy answered. She allowed Nathan to take her elbow and guide her to the door and to the elevator. The moment they stepped in the elevator, she jerked her arm away from him and turned on him. Are you kidding me right now? This is the type of establishment you people are running? Kidnapping? Threats? Who the hell is that woman? Whoa, whoa, whoa. No, it's not that type of establishment. Marissa did that because she knows I like you, Nathan admitted. His admission took all the fire out of Lucy's anger. She stared at him, shocked. Nathan saw her hesitation and used the opportunity to kiss her soundly. He yanked her against him and crushed his lips against hers. His tongue softened her lips, and she parted them, accepting his invasion. He sank into the kiss, and she helped him by running her hands up his neck and into his hair, fisting her hands around the silky strands. The elevator dinged, announcing their arrival on the ground floor. They separated only when the doors whooshed open. He gestured for her to step out in front of him. She stared at him a moment, then turned and walked out. He followed, watching her for any reaction to the kiss. She touched her lips, which drove him to distraction. He wanted her. And he was pretty sure she wanted him. They stepped out into the beautiful afternoon. She stopped walking. She didn't know where to go. Lucy looked back at him and asked, Where do we go? I'll take you back to your apartment. I have a car parked over there. He nodded in the direction of his car. As they drove to her apartment in silence, she kept stealing glances at him. Her head was spinning with a decision, and finally that decision escaped her lips. I want to have sex with you, Lucy announced matter-of-factly. Nathan nearly swerved, he was so stunned. Okay. Thank you? Lucy giggled a little. I'm asking you to come up to my apartment when we get there. He looked at her, gauging her behavior. Why? Lucy huffed out a breath and rolled her eyes at him. Really? After that kiss and the one last night? There's something here, can't you tell? Nathan smiled a huge smile. I thought it was just me. No. Now drive this damn thing fast, Lucy ordered. Nathan pressed down on the gas, going around cars when he had to. Once they entered her apartment, the momentum was faster than any car could travel.
Oh no, another love scene had to be taken out due to YouTube's policies.
If you haven't already, join Romancely Audio Velvet to get love scenes for all stories.
Link to join is in the description. Pause this and do that.
It's okay, we'll wait.
If you're already a member, the love scene reference is That Shifter Love, Chapter 4, Love Scene 3.
Signed up?
Good, now back to the story. Chapter 5. A few hours later, Nathan left Lucy's apartment after securing dinner plans with her that evening. He kissed her soundly and told her he couldn't wait to see her later. She smiled at him from her doorway until the elevator had closed. Lucy shut her apartment door and leaned against it, sighing happily. She felt a little sore after their lovemaking, but she had every intention of bringing him home again after their date tonight. She couldn't believe what was going through her mind. I think I'm in love. She smacked herself in the forehead at the insanity of that thought. I've known him for one day. What is this, Romeo and Juliet? Coffee was calling her name, even though she hadn't made it yet. She grabbed the pot, the filter, and the coffee to make the coffee. As it was percolating, she walked back to her bedroom to get her phone. She had a friend, a werbear, who she'd met the first month she'd been here. He was a strange old dude who lived in a tenement building unoccupied by anyone other than himself. He owned it but refused to rent out any of the other 12 apartments. He had named each apartment after a month and lived in that apartment during that month. He'd furnished them all from thrift shops and Goodwills. She had no idea how he paid for any of it, but she assumed he had a ton of money somewhere. "Hey, Chopper," she greeted when he answered. She didn't know his real name, only the nickname she assumed he'd given himself at some point in his life. "Lucy here. Remember me? From the coffee shop." "Hello, Wolfie." He'd given her a nickname as well. She wasn't sure if he even knew her real name. "How's my favorite werewolf?" "Your favorite? That's rich," she teased. "You haven't come to see me in months." "Well, sweet thing, I have to spread the wealth of my company around. Don't you worry, I'll be around your way again soon enough," he replied. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this phone call? You having troubles?" When they'd met, Chopper had known immediately what she was and had asked for her specifically to wait on him. He'd offered his help to her as a newcomer any time she needed it and had visited her at the cafe several times over the next few weeks. He'd eventually given her his phone number and told her to call him if she needed anything at all. Then he'd disappeared. This was the first time she'd called his number. "Kind of, I think," she laughed. "That sounds a little crazy, huh?" "Nothing sounds crazy to a crazy man, sweet thing," he responded happily. "Tell old Chopper what's happening?" "The other night a man attacked me, and I shifted to protect myself." She heard his intake of breath and continued before he could interrupt. "I know I'm not supposed to, Chopper, but he was going to rape me." "Jesus, girl, I'm glad you're okay," Chopper said. "But I sense that's not the end of the story. Not by far. A guy named Nathan from something called The Guard followed me that night and saw. He came to the cafe the next day and asked to speak with me." Lucy finished the story, telling about the kidnapping, the argument with Marissa, and the meeting with the head. She left out the sex with Nathan part. "So what I want to know is, am I safe or should I be worried?" Chopper was silent for a few minutes. She could picture his gray hair tied back in a ponytail at the nape of his neck, his old school glasses on his point nose, his eyes squinting because they weren't the right prescription. She's learned that if he didn't answer right away, it was because he needed to think about the right answer. She also knew he had an astute mind and his answers were usually accurate. After another moment of silence, he spoke. "First of all, stay clear of them. I don't like them at all, but I don't like any governing body, so that's not saying much." He chuckled at himself quietly before continuing. "I understand the necessity of having the guard in a big city. From what I understand, all big cities have something like them. So I need to keep my distance?" Lucy asked, her mind on Nathan and how that would work. If she needed to stay away from the guard, did she have to include him? Probably. "I would. Don't shift unless there's a dire need. and even then only after you've considered every other option. He paused and made a humming noise as if considering something. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's not to scare you, it's to inform you. Lucy pressed the phone hard against her ear. When Chopper told a story, there was always a lesson to be learned. Okay, I understand. When I was about your age, a lovely werewolf was accused of attacking and nearly killing a human. She claimed it was defense and even had a bad wound on her chest, but a witness stepped forward and claimed she came out of nowhere and attacked the man with no provocation that he could see. The guard had no choice but to mete out punishment. The head chose to banish her rather than have her executed. Rumors ran around that he knew why she'd really attacked the man, even though she wouldn't say. No one knows why for sure. So she was banished? Is the punishment usually death? For attacking a human? Depends. If the human dies, yes, the were will be executed. If he or she lives, it depends. Do you remember the woman's name? Where she went? Lucy asked. She had a dreadful feeling. The scar on the chest of the woman tugged at her memory and her heart. Ah, girl, you know I'm not good with names, Chopper replied. But I think it was Mary or Mary Jane, something like that. Marianne. Could be. I don't remember for sure. Anyway, the guard, while they do protect us, I honestly believe their first concern is protecting humans. Lucy nodded, her mind elsewhere. When he called her nickname, she shook her head and apologized. Sorry there, Chopper. Got lost in thought. Hey, listen, you come by the cafe and see me sometime. Don't make me come find you. He cackled. I'll try to swing by soon, sweet thing. Call me if you need something. Will do. Thanks. She heard him disconnect and slowly lowered her phone to her lap. He wouldn't be by any time soon, but she believed he meant it when he offered his assistance. She smiled sadly to herself and remembered when she'd been a little girl waiting for her mother to finish showering. When she'd stepped out of the shower stall, Lucy had seen a scar arching across her chest from her collarbone, between her breasts, and down across her ribs. She had asked about it, and her mother hadn't answered. She'd never seen her mother without clothes again. Marianne attacked a human and had been banished for it. I'm glad Marissa wasn't in here when Lucy said her mother's name. She would have been all over that, Nathan claimed. You're right. That's the most famous case of a were in the city attacking and nearly killing a human. We still don't know why, and she refuses to speak to anyone from the guard about it. The head replied morosely. He remembered the case clearly. It was still a mystery. He was surprised she hadn't changed her name when she'd left town. I don't think Lucy knows anything about it or she wouldn't have said her name. And it's weird her mother didn't at least mention the guard when she knew her daughter was moving here. Nathan mused. I'll bet there was a big fight when Lucy told her parents about her decision, the head murmured. Nathan nodded his agreement. So what do we do with this information? Lucy didn't attack the man, he attacked her. I saw it. And even when she could have attacked him, she didn't. She let him run away. We sit on it. It's in the past, it's unimportant at this time, the head answered. Then he smiled knowingly at Nathan. So, Nathan, why did it take you so long to get back after escorting Lucy home? Nathan chuckled. Come on, boss, you know I don't kiss and tell. But Marissa has good reason to be jealous. The head threw his head back and roared with laughter. Damn, boy, you better be careful. Marissa's got a mad brain in her head sometimes. Nathan nodded his agreement. We're done and have been for so long. I don't know what her problem is. The head sobered and remarked, I do, son. She picked her career over a life and is regretting it. I know how she feels. Nathan stared at his boss. This revelation on his part was a rarity. Few people knew anything about him but what he did at work. He lived here in the apartment that had been created for the head, and he lived alone and always had. Nathan looked away as the silence stretched. The head shook himself out of his reverie and stated, Get on out of here, Nathan, and enjoy life. Nathan nodded and left quickly, his mind on what his boss had revealed. He wouldn't live his life like that, he swore to himself. Lucy's image popped into his mind. Involuntarily, his eyes widened at the realization of what that meant. Hi, Dad, Lucy said into the phone. How's it going? Hey, sweetheart. Not much happening here. Same old, you know. Her father answered in his deep, gruff voice. Is everything all right? You don't normally call the satellite phone. For safety reasons, the camp leader and elders had decided they needed a satellite phone just in case. Used rarely for anything other than chatting with members of the pack who had moved away, the phone stayed in the leader's tent most of the time. Lucy had called and asked if he could take it to her mother. Instead, she'd gotten her father. Well, Dad, I need to talk to Mom about something. You know, girl stuff. That was the surest way to get her dad out of the conversation. Mention girl stuff. Girl stuff, huh? Well, let me go get her then, he replied hastily. Lucy could hear him calling her mother, who must have been away from the tent she and her father resided in. All werewolves lived in camps in tents. They called themselves packs and were a true family unit. Some left, sure, but they knew where they could go if they needed anything. Finally, her mother's voice came on the line. Lucy, is everything okay? Your father said you were having girl troubles. Lucy laughed. No, I just said that to get him off the phone quicker. Now, Lucy, that's not the nicest thing you've ever done, her mother admonished, giggling as she did so. You do it too, Lucy said. Not the point, dear, her mother said. Now, why are you calling the satellite phone? It must be important. Mom, I need to ask you a serious question, and I don't think you're going to like answering it. Okay. Lucy heard the hesitation in her mother's voice. She sighed. She really didn't like confrontation. I met some members of the guard this morning. The silence stretched for so long that Lucy thought the line had been disconnected. Her mother's voice was quiet when she answered. I'm surprised it took them this long to speak with you. Are you all right? Why did they want to talk to you? Lucy retold the story about Austin and Shifting and Nathan. She chose to omit the kidnapping part, explaining that they'd sent a car to pick her up and take her to the guard's headquarters. Anyway, after meeting with them, I called Chopper. You remember me telling you about Chopper, right? At her mother's murmur of agreement, she continued. He told me to be careful around them, and he told me a story about a woman who had been banished because she attacked a human. A woman with a large scar on her chest. The question in that statement was clear. Marianne sighed heavily. Lucy, that was a long time ago. Yes, that story is about me, but I don't talk about that time in my life. This is my life now. Is that why you didn't want me to move to the city? That's exactly why I didn't want you in the city. It's a horrible place filled with horrible people. Tell me what happened, Mom. Why did you attack that man? Chopper said he died soon after the attack. Did you kill him? No, I didn't kill him. One of his own men killed him. He deserved it. In fact, his death was too easy for someone like him. Lucy was shocked by her mother's words. Marianne had always been a kind woman with only kind words to say. The vicious speaker was a side of her mother's personality she'd never heard or seen. Mom, what happened? Marianne sighed. That man was despicable, Lucy. That doesn't answer my question, Lucy pointed out. Fine, but not a word to your father. He doesn't know this side of my life, her mother ordered. Okay, sure thing. I won't say a word to anyone, Lucy assured her. I worked at the police station as a clerk when I was young and fresh out of school. I heard or read about all the terrible things humans did to one another. None of my coworkers knew I was a were, except for the handful of other wers that worked there. One afternoon, a workat named Bob asked me to lunch and I agreed. Her mother paused as if remembering the exact memory. He told me about a group they'd formed within the Department for Wers Only, a sort of vigilante group. They would take care of people who the law couldn't touch, if you know what I mean. I liked the idea. So many men and women got away with such awful crimes. Mom, that's against the law as much as what they were doing, Lucy said quietly. She had never believed in vigilante justice. Stories of lynch mobs attacking innocent wers when they'd first revealed themselves to humans entered her brain. I don't know what to say. Don't judge until you hear the rest. I know it's not right, but you haven't seen the things I have seen, her mother quietly admonished before continuing. A case came across my desk a week later. A man had been arrested for running a prostitution ring. Evidence was scarce. Several prostitutes were found dead a week later. I spoke to the group and we did some investigating. Lucy, what I discovered, and later saw, will live with me until I die. I still have the occasional nightmare and have to lie to your father about why I can't sleep for several days. Good Lord, Mom. What could have been so horrible? He didn't run a prostitution ring. He ran a child sex trafficking ring. Lucy gasped, her hand over her heart at the horror those words inspired in her. No, that's terrible. Lucy, you have no idea. We scouted out the place where he kept them. Children as young as 5, boys and girls, held like animals. I knew what would happen to each and every one of them, and I saw red. Before the others could stop me, I shifted and attacked him while he was on his way home. He had a large knife. That's how I got the scar and why I didn't kill him. Why were you punished? What happened to all the children? Luckily, the human police received an anonymous tip and conducted a raid. They saved nearly 50 children, ages 4 to 14. Many of them were already damaged beyond repair. Some had only just arrived. The guard chose to banish me rather than execute me, and 3 days after I left, one of my friends called me and told me he'd been shot and killed while on the run from the police. Lucy was astonished by the information her mother had revealed to her. In a way, her mother was a hero, but then again, she'd attacked an unarmed man. So am I safe here, Mom? Will the guard hold that stuff against me? They know I'm your mother? Yes. Lucy didn't tell her she'd told them her mother's name while chatting with them. I doubt they'll hold it against you, and you're certainly not in any danger. But they will keep a closer eye on you. Be wary. Her mother warned her. I will be, Lucy answered quietly, her thoughts on Nathan, her feelings for him, and how he might feel about her. Listen, Mom, I need to call Kayla. We're talking about finding a place together. Oh, I think that's a wonderful idea, Marian responded, her mood lifted by the news. We love you. Keep us updated. Will do. Love y'all too, Lucy said before ending the call. She had some serious research to do and so many questions to answer. But first she needed to talk to Kayla about all that had happened as well as talk apartments. She grabbed her phone again and called Kayla. Hey girl, what are you doing? Hey, not much. Are you on shift today? I'm supposed to be, but I called in. I've had a rough morning, Lucy said. I picked up your shift. Somebody's going shopping this weekend. Kayla exclaimed loudly enough that Lucy pulled the phone away from her ear. So, what happened this morning? Well, first of all, I was kidnapped. Lucy enjoyed shocking her best friend. Her gasp through the phone and the garbled words she spewed elicited a laugh out of Lucy. Yes, actually kidnapped. Lucy told Kayla what had happened to her that morning, including all the details, even about the guard, which she assumed she probably wasn't supposed to tell anyone about. But oh well. So that Nathan guy brought you home? Kayla asked suspiciously. Yes. And, Kayla, you know I don't kiss and tell. Bullshit. Lucy guffawed at her friend calling her out. You're right. I so do. He was amazing. And since I called in, we're going out tonight. Fantastic. I'm happy for you, Lucy, Kayla assured. Think this might turn into something? I hope so, because I sure do like him, and not just for his prowess in the bedroom, Lucy boasted. Kayla laughed loudly, and Lucy waited for her to quiet. So, hear anything about an apartment? No. When are you off next? We should go look together. I work tomorrow and pretty much all weekend. Maybe we could go Monday morning? That should work, Kayla agreed. Hey, thanks for agreeing to move in together. I'm even more nervous now after this morning. Although the head guy assured me I was safe. I don't like the sound of all that, Kayla said. Sounds awfully suspicious. Lucy told her about her conversation with Chopper, but chose to leave out her conversation with her mother. That was private family business. That's weird and creepy, but I remember Chopper. If he says it's okay, Kayla claimed. Lucy murmured her assent. Anyway, I have to go. Got to get ready for my big date. I want full details tomorrow. I don't really expect you'll be able to call tonight, Kayla teased. Shut up. Lucy laughed as she disconnected the phone and walked into the bathroom for a shower. She wanted to look hot tonight. When she opened the door to welcome him, she wanted his mouth to hit the floor because he was so overwhelmed by her beauty. She giggled as she reached into the shower and turned on the water. As she stepped under the water, she thought of all the outfits she could wear, indecisive about which would be the sexiest.
Chapter 6. Lucy had chosen a red dress that hugged every curve and showed off her thighs. She still followed her mother's advice: if you show it low, keep it high up top. Her cleavage was encased by the halter top of the dress, but that halter was tight enough that not much was left to the imagination. Her sky-high heels matched perfectly, and her clutch added just the right amount of class to an almost slutty outfit. After looking in the mirror again and again, indecision warred within her. A text to Kayla was the answer. She sent her a full-body selfie and asked her if she looked too slutty. Kayla's reply was just slutty enough. Hot. Lucy smiled at her response and sent back a thank you. As usual, she was ready way too early, so she spent some time on her laptop, looking at news stories. Her dream of being a journalist had been brought on by her love of information. She read the news daily, watching for stories that interested her. Nothing jumped out at her as important, although she did come across a funny story about a man who swore he'd seen Bigfoot in the park. Her eyebrows were at her hairline at first. She thought she'd been seen and mistaken for one of those nasty creatures who scavenge off others. But the sighting had been at a park across town, not the one by her apartment, so she allowed herself to relax. I wonder if that's the type of story the guard is required to check out, she thought. Her interest in the guard was piqued. She glanced at the clock on her laptop and decided she had a little time to do some research. She remembered that Chopper had told her all cities have something like the guard, so there had to be some information out there. I doubt I'll find much about a secret group of wers who protect other wers as well as keep them in check, she mused. Lucy began at Google, searching the city's name and the guard. She had to sift through business names and such, but finally she found some conspiracy theories created by humans who didn't seem to have a clue what the guard actually was. The first one she read explained how the guard was a U.S. government agency that specialized in the paranormal. And that's where the truth ended. It was a comic book filled with characters like the X-Men or Hellboy. Not one word was mentioned about werewolves, werecats, werebears, or any other kind of were. Another website proclaimed the guard was comprised of witches and wizards. Harry Potter popped into her mind as she read the articles, and she smiled. She loved those books and the movies. And, after all, witches and wizards were real, although as far as she knew they didn't go to wizard schools in castles. That would draw way too much attention, and she was pretty sure they couldn't create a hiding spell that powerful. She clicked on the next website on the list. Still nothing she would call useful, just more theories about what the guard might be. Humans had no clue, and apparently nowhere would put up a website calling them out. She wondered if she told someone about the guard, and that someone talked, if she would be in danger. A question for Nathan, she decided. The doorbell rang. She jerked in surprise. She hadn't realized so much time had passed. She'd intended to check her makeup one more time before he got there. Too late now. She rose, adjusted her dress, and walked quickly to the door. Nathan's reaction was exactly what she'd hoped it would be. His jaw dropped, and a little drool may have dribbled down his chin. He was speechless. "Hi," Lucy purred at him. "Wow. You look amazing, beautiful, stunning." He stopped talking and shook his head. "I'm sorry, none of those words are good enough for the way you look." Heat shot through Lucy's body. She smiled at him, and he dramatically put a hand over his heart. "I am in awe of you right now." Lucy giggled prettily. "If you hadn't already gotten into my pants, that line sure would have worked." He gaped at her frankness and laughed loudly. I am digging the way you talk, sexy lady. I'm glad, because I dig the way you talk, too. Nathan leaned in and clasped her hand in his. Are you ready to go? I'm thinking dinner on a patio with a drink in hand, maybe some live music after. What do you think? I think that sounds perfect, she replied. Let me grab my bag. She turned to walk back into her apartment. The door closed, and she turned around and ended up in Nathan's arms. He crushed his mouth to hers. He licked her lips until she opened them and welcomed him. His tongue played softly against hers, and her knees went weak. She lifted her arms around his neck, and his hand held her against him. Breathless, Lucy pulled away, placing a hand on his chest and pushing him back just a little. If you keep that up, we won't make it to dinner, handsome. I have no problem with that. I want you more than I want food. He reached for her again, but she shied away, smiling. I did not get all dressed up to have you ravish me before dinner, she laughed, her hand once again on his chest. But I'll tell you something you'll think about all through dinner. What's that? I'm not wearing anything under this dress. His eyes bulged, and he pretended to faint. You're killing me here. I'll order anything you want and have it delivered. Pizza, Chinese, a third world country. Anything, if we can stay here and get naked. Damn, boy. You drive a hard bargain, she teased. But I want that drink and patio. I'll build one for you. Lucy laughed again and grabbed his hand. She pulled him to the door and handed him her key. Lock my door on our way out, handsome. I'm hungry for food now. I'll be hungry for you later. As Nathan locked the door, she slapped his ass. He looked down at her with a grin the size of the moon. Do I at least get to cop a feel under the table? She turned and walked away from him, swinging her hips lasciviously. When she glanced over her shoulder at him, he was staring at her ass. She smiled and replied, I would be so disappointed if you didn't. Dinner was perfect. The food was tasty and the drinks perfectly mixed. Lucy and Nathan laughed and talked about everything. 3 hours after sitting down at the table, they were still sitting there, laughing at each other's childhood stories and high school memories. The waiter appeared with their last round and the check. Thank you so much for a wonderful night. Lucy leaned forward. I hope it isn't over when dinner is. He looked at her as he signed the check. Their eyes locked, and her meaning was clear. It's not over until you tell me to go home. He lifted his face to hers and kissed her gently. The kiss became heated and would have grown more so if they hadn't been interrupted. You bitch. Lucy and Nathan looked up simultaneously at Austin, who glared at Lucy as if he might kill her. Nathan sat back and said, Excuse me? Austin's gaze shifted briefly to Nathan. I'm not talking to you, prick. I'm talking to the werewolf bitch here. Lucy's eyes widened. She had thought Austin was too drunk to understand what had happened that night. His mind must have cleared after a few days of processing what he'd seen, and now he was calling her out in front of other humans. She looked around. Luckily only a couple tables were occupied besides their own and no one was paying any attention to them. Austin, you need to leave, Lucy muttered angrily. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're a werewolf. I saw you, Austin repeated. You tried to kill me. Oh, please. I did not try to kill you. You assaulted me and would have done more given the chance, Lucy retorted. I could have pressed assault charges. I had a huge bump on the back of my head. You can't press charges because you can't go to the police. You're a werewolf, Austin reaffirmed. Lucy had hoped he was drunk tonight as well, but his gaze was steady on hers. She glanced at Nathan, whose eyes hadn't left Austin's face since he'd interrupted their kiss. She put her hand on his thigh and looked back at Austin. "Austin, you're being ridiculous. You haven't denied it. You changed into a werewolf when I was kissing you and tried to kill me." "Kissing me? You were molesting me, you asshole." Lucy spoke quickly but quietly. "You slammed my head into the wall and I fell down. When I looked up, there was a dog and you were running away. End of story." Austin opened his mouth to speak, but Nathan interrupted him. "She said that's what happened, pal, so that's what happened. Now get the hell out of here. Now." Austin was visibly shaken. "I'll leave, but you're on a date with a werewolf. She'll kill you in your sleep." He turned and walked away, glancing maliciously back at them. Lucy stared at the table for a moment. Nathan put his finger under her chin and lifted it so she was looking at him. "Don't worry about that guy, Lucy. He's a blowhard." "Yes, but he confronted me in public. He knows where I work and what neighborhood I live in," she sighed. "Should I be concerned?" "I think so, yes, but not so much that you allow it to ruin your life." "I saw what happened," he said to her, hoping to comfort her. "But no one else saw it. If he talks to people I know, I might have to move." "I can talk to him, if you like," he offered. She chuckled and narrowed her eyes at him. "Do you mean threaten?" He shrugged noncommittally and replied, "Kind of. I think I'll wait and see what happens. He's a drunk misogynist. I told a couple people at the cafe what happened with him, minus the shifting part, so he'll just sound like a lunatic." The waiter stopped by and asked if they needed anything else. They shook their heads and Nathan handed him the signed receipt. He looked at her and smiled. "I think it's time to go back to your place," Nathan commented with a little eyebrow wiggle and a peck on the lips. She giggled her agreement and gathered her things. Marissa had watched the scene unfold between Lucy and the human from behind her menu. Her interest was piqued. He may be the path to ridding Nathan of Lucy. After 3 years without him, Marissa had realized that she had made a mistake in pushing Nathan away so she could focus on her career. She'd been thinking about it even before Lucy had waltzed her fat ass into his life, and she wasn't going to let that bitch get in the way of her happiness. When Austin stomped away from Lucy and Nathan, Marissa had followed his path. She looked at the couple, who were engrossed in conversation that ended with a kiss, much to her dismay, and left before they could. She hurried out the front door of the restaurant and looked in all directions until she spotted Austin shambling down the sidewalk. She chased after him and called his name. Nathan took the keys from Lucy when they walked into her apartment building with the idea of unlocking her door. He opened it and allowed her to precede him inside, then closed and locked it behind him. He turned, and she pounced, attaching her lips to his and pressing her body against him. He grunted his surprise but returned the kiss just as forcefully. Her hands skittered down his chest, over his stomach, and to the fly of his pants. He took her wrists and halted her progress. "Hold up there, sexy. I have a favor to ask," he murmured against her lips. Lucy pulled away, staring at him in surprise. "A favor? Unbuttoning your pants quickly is a favor I'd like to grant you." She reached for his pants again. Nathan chuckled at her insistence. "Shift for me." His words stopped her fingers. She looked up at him. "Why? You've seen me in my wolf form." "Yes, but not close up." "I'll shift for you, if you want," Nathan offered. "Okay, I guess. But you go first," she insisted. She turned away from him and sat down on the couch. Why don't you undress first? No need to ruin your nice clothes. She leaned forward and removed her shoes, then watched him, a wicked gleam in her eye.
Hi again. Unfortunately, there was another adult scene here which we've had to take out.
If you're a member of Romancely Audio Velvet, you can log in and hear it now.
The love scene reference is That Shifter Love, Chapter 6, Love Scene 4.
If you're not yet a Romancely Audio Velvet member, check the description to join now.
Okay, back to the story.
She joined her scream with his.
Chapter 7. Lucy snuggled up next to Nathan, a lazy smile on her face. Her body was sated. Her mind relaxed more than it had ever been. Her eyes were closed, so she could not see that he was watching her, enjoying the content on her face. He ran a finger down her cheek and across her lips, and her smile grew with his finger. He continued the slow massage of her face until she spoke. Oh no, it's about to get hot. But we can't put this on YouTube as they don't allow it. I'm sorry, but check the description of this video to join Romancely Audio Velvet and get the steamy scenes in future. If you're already a member, the love scene reference is That Shifter Love, Chapter 7, Love Scene 1. Okay, back to the story. Marissa had followed Austin several blocks on foot. She complained in her mind about her choice of footwear that day. A pair of 4-inch heels in a lovely maroon to match her blouse. Her feet would hurt tomorrow, but that was a good excuse to wear her athletic shoes to work tomorrow. Casual Thursday, it would seem. She laughed at herself. Marissa lost sight of Austin for a moment. She craned her head up and saw his back entering a bar 3 doors down from her. Perfect, she thought. Drunks are so easy to coerce. Marissa had never shied away from using her looks and flirting ability to get her way. She had never stooped to actually sleeping with anyone to get what she wanted, but she wasn't sure she wouldn't. She'd never been put in that position, so she didn't know what she would do. But there was little she wouldn't stoop to in order to get her way. The bar was definitely not of the finest quality. She looked around to acclimate her eyes to the lack of light. The nighttime sky was actually brighter. Each table had its own candle and the bar was lit by 2 globes hanging from the ceiling. That was all the available light. Few people patronized the bar, and none had looked up when she entered. The bartender had given her a cursory glance before returning to the book he was reading. Marissa looked around and saw Austin at the very end of the bar, almost hidden by the keg handles advertising the 4 types of beer sold most. They were the cheapest beers sold anywhere, and the most tasteless. Austin pulled back quickly when she sat on the bar stool next to him. He looked her up and down, frowning. She very obviously didn't fit in at this bar in her business attire. Austin, do you need something? She smiled. I couldn't help but hear your conversation at the restaurant with that woman. He glared at her. Yeah, so? What about it? I believe you. She is a werewolf. And that man she was with is also a she told him. His eyes widened, but he didn't speak. You say she attacked you? Yes. 1 minute we were making out. The next she was growling at me and tried to bite me. He confirmed his story. Marissa felt a moment of disgust at this hideous man. She didn't doubt for a moment that he had attacked Lucy. But she didn't care. Lucy had to go. Besides Nathan's attraction to her, Marissa had done her research and found out who her mother was. Lucy would definitely cause trouble if she remained in the city. If she were banished like her mother, so many problems could be solved. Who have you told so far? Marissa asked the man as the bartender sauntered over. I'll have a rum and coke, please, and whatever he wants. Austin narrowed his eyes at her. Beautiful women didn't buy his drinks. Same, he told the bartender without taking his eyes off her. Listen, lady, what do you want? Who have you told? She asked again. No one, he mumbled, his head hung low. When I saw her at the restaurant, the memory came back to me. It was fuzzy until then. I lost my temper. I understand that well, Marissa concurred. But I think you need to speak to a reporter. The police won't believe you, and this kind of thing shouldn't go unnoticed. Those damn wers are dangerous creatures, especially that one. The bartender sat their drinks down in front of them and moved away. Austin had been nodding in agreement as she spoke. He pointed his finger at her chest, mere inches from touching her. Marissa sneered, but he didn't notice. You're right. Those damn things are evil. There's no way I'm the first person to be attacked by one of those things. And Lucy has always hated me. He took a deep pull on the rum and coke. Marissa cringed and debated about the intelligence of this move. She stared at him as he mumbled to himself about those damn things and decided that no matter how this went, she'd at least get to watch Lucy put in a bad spot. I know just the person, Marissa whispered conspiratorially. She pulled a card out of bag and handed it to him. She pointed at it and said, "This guy works for one of the local stations. He's always looking for interesting stories." "He doesn't work that way, I assure you," she told him. "He'll make you look like the victim you are, and make her look like a monster. He has a certain prejudice against the wers." Austin nodded his head. "I'll do it first thing in the morning." Marissa pulled a few bills out of her wallet and laid them on the bar. "I think that's a good idea, Austin." She rose and exited the bar, musing that she'd call her friend at the news station in the morning and make sure Austin had called him. A smile crossed her face as she hailed a cab. The next morning, Lucy and Nathan lay in bed together, curled around each other like they'd slept together every night for years. Lucy woke but didn't move. She didn't want to wake him. His face was close to hers, and she wanted to look at him for a few minutes so she could memorize it. His lashes were dark against his skin and incredibly long. His blonde hair was mussed from sleep and sex, and he looked like he'd stepped out of the ocean after surfing and let the breeze dry it. She wanted to brush it off his forehead so she could more clearly see his handsome face. So she did, then jumped when his eyes flashed open. "You did, but I don't mind one bit," Nathan replied. He kissed her forehead, her nose, and her lips softly. "I like waking up like this," she said, snuggling closer to him. "Yeah, me too," Nathan agreed. "How about another romp, sexy lady?" What a romantic offer," she teased. They kissed slowly. "What a good morning." "Morning? Honey, it's nearly 1, he chuckled, glancing at the clock on her side table. "We slept late after a night of continuous loving." Lucy laughed, but it was cut short when she gasped. "Oh my God, I have to be at work by 2. She threw the covers off and leapt out of bed, nearly running for the bathroom. "I can't be late today. I called in sick yesterday. Damn it." Nathan watched her panic retreat into the bathroom and heard the shower come on. He followed her at a more relaxed pace and called to her, "Calm down, babe. I'll drive you over so you don't have to walk." "You're a lifesaver, you know that," she replied through the shower curtain. "I can slow down, actually have a cup of coffee, maybe even a muffin." "Sure, and thanks," she said. She stuck her head out of the shower curtain for a kiss. "I'll be ready in 10. Nathan dropped Lucy off at the cafe 30 minutes later with a quick kiss goodbye and the promise of a text to plan their next date. Lucy's face wouldn't stop smiling as she walked into the back door of the cafe, and Jeff stared at her. "You don't look sick," he said. "I feel so much better today, you have no idea," she replied, smiling openly at him. He only stared at her for a moment longer and walked back into his office. Kayla rushed in immediately after and looked at Lucy, whose smile still shone brightly. "Well, somebody got laid last night," she mused teasingly as she tied on her apron. "Shut your dirty mouth," Lucy retorted with a grin, then leaned in. "And hell yeah, I got laid last night. Later, I promise." "Here's one little tidbit for you, though," Lucy whispered. "I'm falling in love with him." "Holy shit, really?" "Yep. Now get your stuff and let's make some money." Lucy laughed at her friend's expression. They spent the afternoon filling salt and pepper shakers, replacing ketchup bottles and napkins, and wrapping silverware in preparation for the evening rush. Jeff was busy behind the bar. One of the keg pumps didn't seem to be working properly. Lucy filled Kayla in on the events of her life the last couple of days, not leaving out the confrontation with Austin or every detail about Nathan's amazing lovemaking. Throughout the afternoon, a handful of customers came in and out, some for meals, others just for coffee, some even asked for beers. Lucy smiled at them all, and her good mood was infectious. Her tips were large that afternoon because she treated everyone to her killer smile and Sunshine Y attitude. "Hey, Kayla," Lucy called to her friend as her customers left. "I'm taking a break before my tables start filling up." "Okay, I'll go after you get back," Kayla replied as she walked to refill waters for her customers. Lucy walked behind the bar and into the back room, where she sat down on the bench in front of their cubbyholes and rested her feet for a moment. The murmur of the television in Jeff's office caught her attention. He rarely left it on because he didn't like to waste electricity on a TV in his office. She stepped through the door and reached for the remote on his desk to turn it off when she heard the prep for the next story: a werewolf attack. Her attention focused on the television. "You claim a werewolf attacked you?" asked a male reporter Lucy didn't recognize. "I don't claim it, I'm affirming it," Austin said. Lucy gasped when she saw his face on the screen. "Can you tell us exactly what happened?" "Yes, I was walking a friend home from work and we started making out," Austin told the camera, smiling like an idiot. "All of a sudden, she disappeared and a wolf was standing in front of me. It lunged at me, nearly biting my throat. I ran away." "It didn't follow you?" "No, it didn't. I ran all the way to a crowded street and hailed a cab and went straight home." "Who was this werewolf? Do you know her identity?" Lucy's stomach clenched. She looked over her shoulder to make sure no one was around. She looked back at the television as Austin answered, holding her breath. Lucy expelled her breath in a whoosh. Relief washed through her, but it was temporary. "What do I do?" she thought. It was only a matter of time before her name was released and everyone found out what she was. Sure, Kayla was okay with it, but she didn't know how Jeff felt about Wers. He might fire her, and her neighbors might not want a Wer living there. Her panic continued to rise. She was almost hyperventilating. She turned off the television and walked back out to the hall and sat down on the bench. She'd put her hand over her chest in an effort to calm herself when she heard her phone vibrating in her cubby. She reached for it quickly and saw Nathan's number. "Nathan." "Calm down, Lucy. We heard the news report and already have a plan to talk to Austin. Your name won't be revealed, I promise," Nathan assured her. "Oh my God, Nathan. I had no idea he'd go to the press. I didn't think he seemed like that kind of guy, either," Nathan mused. "But don't worry. I've told the head and he agrees it needs to be handled quickly." "What do I need to do?" she asked him. "Nothing. Let me handle it," Nathan told her. "That's my job." Lucy could hear the smile in his voice and she smiled in return. "Thank you. You're more than welcome. It'll only cost you a kiss. I'll give you way more than that. I'm going to his place to wait him out. I'll discuss it calmly and find out why he went to the press," Nathan told him. "You didn't think he would?" the head asked. "No. It's been days since the incident happened. Yeah, he confronted Lucy last night, but he seemed more embarrassed than anything. Angry, yes, but not spiteful." The head nodded. "All right, go talk to him. Bring him back if you absolutely need to." "That shouldn't be necessary." At Austin's apartment, Nathan knocked quietly and waited for a response. He stood just to the side of the door so Austin couldn't see who was at his door. He didn't answer when Austin asked who is it, and the door slowly opened. Nathan slammed his shoulder into it, knocking Austin off balance. He stumbled back and hit the couch, tumbling backward over it and landing with a crash on the floor. Nathan quietly shut the door behind him and leaned against it. When Austin had regained his feet, he glared at Nathan. "What the hell? Who are you? Forgot me? I'm Lucy's friend. You yelled at me last night, remember? Called me a prick." Nathan reminded him. Austin's eyes widened, and before he could prevent it, he stepped back from Nathan in a defensive gesture. He looked around for an escape route, but Nathan was leaning against the only door that led out. He put on his bravado and said, "What the hell do you want?" "I saw your little news report this morning," Nathan told him. "I didn't like it much." "I told the truth," Austin defended himself. Nathan stood up from his relaxed position and stepped further into the apartment. "The truth?" he asked with a lifted eyebrow. Austin nodded but didn't speak. Nathan looked around the room before his eyes resettled on Austin's. Your skewed version of the truth is going to get you in a lot of trouble with the wrong people, Austin. Are you threatening me? I'm glad you caught that veiled threat. I wasn't sure you were smart enough, Nathan replied sarcastically. You can't hurt me. I have protection, Austin told him, although his voice shook. Who is going to protect you from the worst? That reporter? I don't think so, Nathan replied with a grin. No, the lady who gave me the reporter's name. She's powerful. She said Lucy was a bad person and had attacked people before, Austin said. Nathan's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he quickly recovered his stoic expression. A lady, huh? Want to tell me her name? No. Nathan lunged forward and grabbed Austin by the neck. He swung him around with supernatural strength and slammed him into the front door of the apartment. How about now? Marissa, Austin choked out. Nathan released him as shock shot through his body. He looked Austin up and down, for the first time realizing the man wasn't dressed. Go put your clothes on. We're going for a little trip. I'm not going anywhere with you, Austin tried to sound brave. But Nathan looked down at him and he scrambled up to run to his bedroom and change. 5 minutes later, they were in Nathan's car and on their way to the guard's headquarters. Marissa sat in the head's office, discussing budget issues with him, when Nathan walked in without knocking, dragging Austin behind him. She jumped to her feet when she saw him, her eyes wide for only a moment before she schooled her expression into nothing but outrage at having been interrupted. Nathan, don't you know how to knock? She asked haughtily as if she couldn't see the human behind him. Nathan, what the hell is going on? The head asked. He didn't care for humans in his office, never had. My apologies, boss. But this human has some very interesting information about the werewolf attack report this morning. Isn't that your problem to handle? Marissa asked scathingly. She had been furious when she realized that Austin hadn't revealed Lucy's name but had decided that would come soon. Right now, she chose to play stupid. Yes, Marissa, it is. It is also my responsibility to handle internal issues, should they arise, Nathan told her, glaring at her and waiting for a response. When none came, not even a flicker of change on her face, he looked at the head and continued. This human claims that a woman named Marissa told him he should go to the press with his story. He told lies to the reporter to make him look like the victim, but we've already heard and confirmed Lucy's side of the story. The head, when he'd heard Marissa's name, had looked at her with raised eyebrows. His eyes didn't leave her face as Nathan spoke. Nathan pushed Austin forward. Austin, would you please tell my boss what you told me earlier? Austin looked from Nathan to Marissa, who very minutely shook her head at him, to the head. He didn't know what to do. Confusion was plain on his face. When he looked at Nathan again, he made his decision. Nathan was the most frightening. Marissa told me to go to the reporter, gave me a card with his name on it, he said, looking at his feet. And is the woman in this room the Marissa you are referring to? Nathan asked. Austin sighed and nodded his head. Yes, that's her. He looked at the head. Please don't kill me. I'm sorry. The head rolled his eyes. We aren't going to kill you, you idiot. We ask that you keep your damn mouth shut or there will be consequences, however. Austin nodded vigorously. I won't tell a soul, I swear. The head pressed an intercom button and called his secretary in. Please have Austin driven home. He indicated to Austin to follow the woman, and they left. His eyes moved to Marissa. So Marissa, do you have anything to say about all this? I do not. Are you maintaining that you did not speak to this human? That you didn't jeopardize the words with your jealous vindictiveness? The head asked pointedly. Marissa remained silent, refusing through her silence to either condemn or defend herself. She glared at Nathan, her eyes not leaving his. He looked back at her blandly. Marissa, do you have anything to say? The head asked again. When Marissa ignored him and only stared at Nathan, he pressed the intercom button again. Send in security. He released the button and looked at her again. Marissa, for your own safety and that of other words, you will remain in custody until an investigation has been completed. You are relieved of all your duties as second in command of the guard. 2 beefy security guards walked into the office and awaited orders. The head looked at them and pointed at Marissa. They looked at her, then back at him, astonishment on their faces. She was their boss. The head spoke. Gentlemen, take Marissa to the detention center and show her to her private cell. Marissa, I'll have your things brought to you. He handed her a pen and notepad. Write down anything you need and give it to the guard. Marissa did not accept the pen and notepad. Her arms remained at her sides. One of the security guards took it for her in one hand. He and the other guard took her arms and led her out the door. The head sat heavily behind his desk and stared at his desk. He looked up at Nathan, who was also stunned by the turn of events. Go see your girl, Nathan, and tell her everything has been handled. What about Marissa? The head sighed. I have no idea, but she can't be allowed to undermine our people like that. She put us all in danger with her actions. I'm sorry, boss, but I felt the same way when that idiot human told me what she'd done. I guess you still aren't interested in taking the post? No, sir. I like my position with the guard as it is. I figured. Go see Lucy, the head said as he swiveled his chair to gaze at the painting behind his desk. Nathan walked out, quietly shutting the door behind him. Nathan was waiting outside for Lucy when her shift ended. Kayla saw him first and elbowed her in the side. She looked up at the hit and saw him. She smiled at Kayla. Nathan, I'd like you to meet my best friend, Kayla, Lucy introduced. Kayla, this is Nathan. They shook hands, and Kayla said, It's a pleasure to meet you. Lucy, I'm gonna walk home with Robbie. You'll have a good night. She very obviously winked to Lucy as she ran after the waiter, calling his name. Lucy looked at Nathan and rolled her eyes at her friend's silliness. She's very happy we met, she explained. I am too, Nathan retorted and kissed her. May I escort you home? Of course, dear gentleman, Lucy replied and took his hand. He led her to his car and opened her door for her before walking around to the driver's side. We handled the Austin issue, Nathan said as he started the car. What happened? Marissa talked him into going to the press, Nathan explained. What? Lucy exclaimed. Why? Marissa and I were in a relationship that ended badly. She chose her career over me. You're the first person I've been interested in since her. Although I had no idea she was that jealous. Lucy shook her head. I can't believe she'd do something like that. Me either. She jeopardized her career to hurt you. She's in that much trouble? Oh yes. She's being held in the detention center until it has been decided what to do with her. I wonder. She mused aloud. What's that? Oh, nothing. Lucy wondered if Marissa would be banished as her mother had been. As they pulled up to her apartment, she turned to him. Nathan, would you like to come upstairs? He smiled at her. I'm so glad you asked. I didn't want to have to invite myself, but I was going to if you didn't invite me. She laughed and then turned serious. I kind of wish you would stay with me every night. Nathan's face brightened. I feel the same way. Lucy tilted her head and smiled. How about a little car making out before we go upstairs for the real show? Let's do it. She leaned towards him. We'll talk about that every night thing in the morning. Yes, ma'am. Their mouths fused and felt like forever. The end. If you want more paranormal romances like this, please, my love, be sure to subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel. I look forward to spending more time with you. Subscribe and let's make it happen.